You are standing at the edge of the Hauptbahnhof in Hanover, and the year is 1920. The war has been over for 2 years, but the city has not recovered. The station platform smells of coal dust, damp wool, and the sour air of too many unwashed travellers pressed together in narrow corridors. Young men arrive here every day. Boys, really, some of them, 15, 16, 17 years old, carrying cloth bags and no plans, drifting in from the countryside or from smaller towns where the work has dried up entirely. They step off the trains and into the low grey afternoon, and they do not know where they will sleep tonight. There is a man who waits for them. He is not tall. He is not remarkable. He has a round, soft face and a way of speaking that puts people at ease, and he carries in his coat pocket a police badge that is not a forgery. He is, in fact, a paid informant for the Hanover Criminal Police, and this is why no one looks too closely at the boys who follow him home and are never seen again. His name is Friedrich Haarmann. Over the next 4 years, in a cramped apartment on the Cellerstrasse, he will kill at least 24 young men. Their belongings will appear in the second-hand markets. Their bones will wash up in the river Leine. And the city, for a long time, will not ask where the meat comes from. Welcome, wherever you are tonight. This is the Bedside Historian, and you have found your way here at whatever late hour it happens to be where you are. Lying in the dark, perhaps, or in some quiet room with the lights turned low. I am glad you are here. If this is your first time listening, I hope you will stay, and if you have been here before, I hope you will consider subscribing or sharing this channel with someone who might also like to fall asleep to history told softly. Now tell me, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it there? It does not matter really. What matters is that you are settled, and that the world outside your room has gone quiet enough to let the past back in. Tonight, the past is Hanover, and the year as you step into it is not a comfortable one. You are standing in the Nordstadt, the northern quarter of the city, sometime in the early months of 1919. The war ended in November, and the Kaiser abdicated, and the soldiers came home to a country that no longer looked like the one they had left. The streets here are narrow and badly lit. The buildings along the Engelbosteler Dam and the streets running off toward the Hauptbahnhof are old, close-built, damp in winter, and crowded beyond what they were ever meant to hold. Hanover is a city of perhaps 300,000 people now, and many of them are hungry. The blockade that the Allied powers maintained through the winter of 1918 and into the summer of 1919 has kept food scarce even after the armistice. There is bread, but it is grey and heavy. There is milk, but not always, and not for everyone. Potatoes come and go. Turnips assist. Coal is difficult to get. The apartments in this part of the city are heated, when they are heated at all, by small iron stoves that burn whatever can be found. Wood scraps, pressed coal dust, old newspaper twisted into bricks, and sometimes nothing. You can smell the city before you understand it. Damp plaster, horse dung in the gutters, the sharp flat smell of coal smoke hanging in still winter air, boiled cabbage from a window left cracked open, wet wool, lye soap, the sourness of drains that have not been properly maintained in 4 years of war, and beneath everything something harder to name. The particular staleness of a city that has been under strain for too long, where the walls have absorbed years of poor ventilation, and the hallways of tenement buildings carry a permanent odour of old cooking fat and damp boots left to dry on stone floors. You walk toward the Hauptbahnhof. It's not far. The station is the centre of gravity for this part of the city, and in these first post-war years it has become something more than a railway terminal. It is a gathering point, a shelter, a marketplace, and a slow-moving disaster. The platforms are busy at all hours. Trains arrive from the south, from the east, from the smaller towns of Lower Saxony, and they bring with them a particular cargo that no one has fully accounted for. Young men, boys, teenagers, and young adults. 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, sometimes younger, travelling alone or in pairs, carrying a single bag or nothing at all. They come from farms where there is no longer enough work. They come from families that can no longer feed them. They come from institutions, reformatories, poorhouses, orphanages that have released them into a country that has no place for them. They come because someone told them there might be work in the city, or because they have run from something they do not wish to name, or because the train was going somewhere and they got on it. You see them on the platforms and in the station hall. They sit on benches with their coats pulled around them. They stand near the ticket windows without buying tickets. They drift toward the exits and then drift back, because outside the station there is nothing waiting for them either. Some of them sleep on the floor of the waiting rooms, curled against the walls, using their bags as pillows. The station police move through from time to time and clear them out, but they come back. They always come back. There is nowhere else to go. The city authorities know about them. Reports from this period describe the problem in bureaucratic language: displaced youth, vagrant minors, itinerant labourers, but the reality on the platform is simpler and more human than that. These are children, many of them standing in a cold station in a broken city, and no one is coming to collect them. You notice, if you watch the station long enough, that certain men move through this crowd with a kind of ease that the boys themselves do not have. They know the layout. They know the schedules. They know which waiting rooms are watched and which are not. Some of them are petty criminals. Some are procurers. Some are simply older men who have learned that hungry boys will follow anyone who offers a meal and a warm room. The police are aware of this. The police, in fact, make use of it. In the chaos of the post-war years, the Hanover criminal police, the Kriminalpolizei, rely heavily on a network of civilian informants to monitor the black markets, the fencing operations, the theft rings, and the underground trade that has overtaken the city. These informants are not respectable men. They are, by necessity, men who already move in the spaces where crime happens, and in exchange for information, they receive money, protection, and a kind of unofficial immunity that allows them to operate with very little oversight. One of these informants is Friedrich Haarmann. You would not notice him at first. He is in his late 30s, born on the 25th of October 1879, right here in Hanover, the sixth child of a locomotive stoker known around the neighbourhood as Only Haarmann. Friedrich is not tall. He is soft-featured, round-faced, with a way of moving that suggests energy held carefully in check. He speaks easily. He smiles. He has a quality that people who met him described afterward with a kind of bewildered discomfort. He was likable. He was friendly. He remembered names. He asked after people. He could talk to anyone, and he did, constantly, moving through the station crowd and the surrounding streets with the confidence of a man who belongs exactly where he is. His history, if you could read it, would explain some of this and leave the rest in shadow. As a boy, he preferred the company of his sisters and his mother, Johann. He did not get along with his father. He was sent at the age of 16 to a military school at Null-Bresac in Alsace, but was discharged after several months on medical grounds. He suffered from fainting episodes, possibly epileptic in nature, though the records are not precise. He returned to Hanover. He drifted. He was arrested for petty offences, small thefts, fraud, minor confidence tricks. He was committed for a time to an institution at Hildesheim, after an assessment raised questions about his mental state, but he was released and the questions were not pursued further. He served briefly in the army during the war, was again discharged and came back to Hanover, where he resumed his old life of small crime and easy talk. Somewhere in this period, the records do not agree on the exact date, but it was around 1918 or 1919, Haarmann began working as a police informant. The arrangement was informal. He reported to officers in the Hanover Kriminalpolizei providing information on stolen goods, black market activity, and the movements of known criminals in the Nordstadt. In return, he was paid small sums and, more importantly, left alone. His own criminal record was effectively set aside. His presence in the station among the drifters and runaways was treated not as suspicious but as useful. He was, in the eyes of the police, a pair of eyes in a place they could not always watch themselves. You are standing near the station entrance now, in the early evening, and you can see him. He is talking to a boy, a young man really, perhaps 17, thin, carrying a canvas bag. The boy looks tired. He looks like he has been travelling for a long time. Haarmann is speaking to him in a low, steady voice, and the boy is nodding. You cannot hear the words, but you can see the shape of the exchange. The older man offering something, a meal, a place to stay, perhaps just the warmth of being spoken to by someone who seems to care. The boy hesitates, and then he does not hesitate, and they walk together toward the exit. This is how it begins, almost every time. Not with force, not with deception in any way the boy could recognize, but with the simplest thing in the world, a kind word from a man who seems to know his way around. Haarmann's relationship with the police is the thing that makes all of this possible, and it is the thing that will later make the case so difficult for the city to bear. He is not hiding from the authorities. He is working with them. When officers conduct sweeps of the station, Haarmann is sometimes there, pointing out suspects, identifying stolen property, offering names. When he brings boys back to his lodgings, it is understood, or at least not questioned, that this is part of his work, that he is keeping an eye on the vagrant population, that he is gathering information. The boys come and go. Some of them are seen again. Some of them are not. And no one, for a very long time, connects the disappearances to the helpful informant with the soft round face and the easy manner. You walk through the streets behind the station. The Cellerstrasse is not far, a narrowish street of tenement buildings, unremarkable. The kind of street where working people live in small rented rooms, and the landlord does not ask questions as long as the rent is paid. The buildings here are old, 3 or 4 stories with steep internal staircases and thin walls. You can hear the neighbours. You can hear their stoves. You can hear their children and their arguments and the scrape of chairs across bare wooden floors. The hallways smell of boiled food and soap, and the faint sweetness of mildew that never quite dries out of old pasta. Haarmann rents rooms here. He has lived at several addresses in the neighbourhood over the years, always in the same kind of place, a room or two, cheaply furnished, close to the station. He keeps the rooms tidy. He is known in the building as a friendly tenant, a man who greets the other residents, who sometimes offers them small cuts of meat or sausage, who seems to be doing reasonably well for himself despite the hard times. He tells people he deals in second-hand goods, clothing, shoes, small household items, and this is true as far as it goes. The black market in Hanover during these years is enormous. Almost everyone buys and sells outside the official economy. Haarmann's trade in used clothing raises no suspicion because half the city is doing something similar. The stove in his room ticks as it cools. You can hear it from the hallway if you stand still long enough. The floorboards creak. There is a bed, a table, a chair, a small wardrobe. There is a bucket for water. There is a basin. The window looks out onto the street or onto a narrow courtyard, depending on which room he is renting at the time. It is an ordinary room in an ordinary building, and the walls are thin enough that the woman next door can hear when he has company. She hears things sometimes at night. A sound that might be a scuffle, a thump. A period of silence afterward that feels, somehow, heavier than the usual nighttime quiet of the building. But she does not report it. No one reports it. The walls in these buildings carry all kinds of sounds. Arguments, illness, drunkenness, the restless sleep of people whose lives are not going well. You learn in a tenement not to listen too carefully to what happens on the other side of the wall. You learn that other people's business is not your concern, especially when the man in question is known to have friends in the police. And so the years pass. 1920, 1921. The trains keep arriving. The boys keep stepping onto the platform with their cloth bags and their uncertain faces. And Friedrich Haarmann keeps meeting them, keeps talking to them, keeps walking them home through the narrow streets behind the station, past the market stalls and the second-hand shops and the beer halls, where men sit in the early evening with their coats still on because the rooms are never quite warm enough. You are still standing in the hallway of the Cellerstrasse building. The stove behind the door has gone quiet. The light under the door is steady, a lamp probably, or a candle. You can hear someone moving inside the room, slowly, methodically, as if tidying up after a long task. There is a faint smell in the hallway that you cannot quite place. It is sweet and wrong, and it does not belong to any of the ordinary smells of the building. Not the cabbage, not the soap, not the mildew, not the coal dust. You do not knock. You do not ask. You stand in the hallway for a moment longer, and then you walk away, as everyone else in this building has walked away, night after night, for years. The floorboards creak once more behind the door, and then the building settles into its ordinary silence, and the city outside goes on. The room is smaller than you expected. You are standing just inside the door, and you can almost touch both walls if you stretch your arms wide. The ceiling is low. The single window faces the courtyard, not the street, and the light that comes through it in the morning is pale and indirect, filtered through the grime on the glass and the narrow gap between the building opposite. By afternoon, the room is already dim. By evening, it belongs entirely to the lamp. There is a bed pushed against the far wall. It is an iron-frame bed, narrow, with a mattress that sags in the centre, and bedding that has been washed often enough to lose its colour. but not often enough to lose its smell. There is a wooden table with one drawer. There is a single chair, sturdy, with a seat worn smooth by years of use. There is a small wardrobe, the door of which does not close properly and must be held shut with a twist of wire looped around the handle. There is a washstand, a basin on a wooden frame, a jug beside it, a cloth folded over the edge. The walls are papered, but the paper has darkened with age and smoke, and the slow accumulation of grease from the stove, and in the corners near the ceiling it has begun to peel away from the plaster in soft, curling strips that move faintly when the door is opened or closed. The stove is the centre of the room. It is a small cast-iron box stove, the kind you find in every tenement in this part of Hanover, blackened with use, standing on a square of sheet metal to protect the floorboards. When it is lit, it warms the room unevenly, hot near the stove, cold near the window, and always a draught along the floor where the air moves between the gap beneath the door and the cracks around the window frame. You learn to sit close to it. You learn to keep your feet off the floor if you can. The stove burns coal when coal is available, and pressed briquettes of coal dust and sawdust when it is not, and sometimes just paper and wood scraps twisted together, and the smoke that comes off these lesser fuels has a different smell, flatter, more acrid, with a chemical edge that clings to clothing and hair and the inside of the nose. You can hear the building around you. This is a thing you notice almost immediately, and it never stops. The walls are thin, lath and plaster, nothing more, and the floors are bare wood, and sound travels through both with a faithfulness that leaves very little to the imagination. You can hear the woman in the room above walking to her stove and back, walking to her basin, walking to her bed. You can hear the rhythm of it, the particular creak of the board near her door, the slightly different creak of the board near her window. You can hear her cough. You can hear her move a pot. You can hear, when the building is quiet enough, the soft scrape of her spoon against the inside of a bowl. Below, someone is talking, but the words are muffled by the floor into a low, uneven murmur that rises and falls without ever becoming clear. A child cries somewhere, not in distress, exactly, but in the thin, persistent, unsatisfied way of a child who is tired and cold and has not had enough to eat. This is the world of the Cellerstrasse tenements in the early 1920s. Every room sounds like every other room. Every evening has the same slow sequence. The lighting of the stove, the heating of whatever there is to eat, the washing of hands and faces in cold water from the basin, the hanging of damp clothes near the stove to dry, the settling of the household into the long dark hours before sleep. The hallway smell of all of this at once, of coal smoke and boiled turnip and lye soap, and the particular mustiness of old wood that has absorbed decades of moisture and cooking and human habitation without ever being properly aired. The stairwells are narrow and unlit after a certain hour, and you climb them by memory and by touch, one hand on the banister, which is smooth and faintly greasy under your fingers. Friedrich Haarmann lives in this building, and he lives well by its standards. His room is no larger than any other, but it is tidier. The bed is made. The floor is swept. The stove is maintained. He knows how to bank a fire properly, how to keep it burning low through the night so the room is not entirely cold by morning. He has more clothing than most of his neighbours, though he does not wear all of it. There are coats hanging on hooks behind the door, and trousers folded over the back of the chair, and shirts stacked in the wardrobe, and shoes, more shoes than one man needs, lined against the wall near the washstand. Some of these things are his. Some of them are not. He is a dealer, as everyone in the building knows, a man who buys and sells second-hand goods, who moves through the markets and the station and the streets of the Nordstadt with a bundle under his arm or a suitcase in his hand, and who always seems to have a little more than the people around him, a little more food, a little more coal, a little more of whatever it is that makes the difference between getting by and not getting by in a city where getting by and not getting by in a city where getting by in the might in the city where getst. He brings people home. This too is known. The neighbours hear them on the stairs, a second set of footsteps, lighter, less certain, following Haarmann's familiar heavy tread up to the landing. The door opens. The door closes. There are voices inside the room for a while. Haarmann's voice mostly, talking steadily in that warm, slightly too friendly way of his, and another voice, quieter, answering in monosyllables or not answering at all. Sometimes there is the sound of food being prepared, a pan on the stove, the clatter of cheap crockery, the particular sound of bread being torn rather than cut. Sometimes there is laughter. Sometimes there is nothing but the murmur of conversation and the creak of the bed frame. The visitors are almost always young. The neighbors have noticed this. They are boys, mostly, in their middle or late teens, thin, poorly dressed. The kind of boys you see at the station or sitting on the steps of the market hall, with nowhere particular to go. They arrive in the evening, and sometimes they leave in the morning, and sometimes they do not leave at all. Or if they do, no one in the building sees them go. This is not, in itself, unusual enough to remark upon. Haarmann has told people that he takes in lodgers from time to time, that he helps the boys from the station find their feet, that it is part of his work. And his work, as everyone understands without saying so directly, has something to do with the police. He has mentioned this. He has not been secretive about it. He has, in fact, made a point of letting people know that he is connected, that he has friends in the K-criminal Polizei, that he is not a man to be troubled over small matters. And this knowledge passed quietly from tenant to tenant, from the woman upstairs to the man across the hall to the landlord who collects the rent on the first of each month, has the effect of drawing a curtain around everything that happens inside Haarmann's room. You are standing in the hallway now, late at night. The building has settled into its deep hours quiet, not silence exactly, because there is always the tick of a stove cooling somewhere, the faint whistle of wind in the stairwell, the distant sound of a cart on a cobbled street, but the particular muffled stillness of a tenement after the last lamp has been turned down, and from behind Haarmann's door you hear something. It is not loud. It is not a scream or a shout or anything that would make you run for help. It is a sound that sits in the ambiguous space between the ordinary noises of a tenement at night and something else, a thud, perhaps, or a heavy shifting, or a sound that might be a voice cut short, followed by a silence that feels, somehow, more deliberate than the silence before it. You stand and listen. The floorboards beneath your feet are cold. The draught from the stairwell moves against your ankles. You hear the tick of the stove inside the room. You hear a slow, steady movement, someone walking carefully, placing each foot with intention, as if carrying something or moving around an obstacle. Then the creak of the bed frame. Then nothing. You go back to your room. You close your door. You lie in your own bed and listen to the building breathe around you, and you do not go to the police, because Haarmann is the police, or close enough to the police that the distinction does not seem to matter. And in the morning, when you pass his door on your way down the stairs, you notice that the hallway smells different, sweeter, heavier, with a faint metallic undertone that does not belong to any of the building's usual smells. But you keep walking, because the morning is cold and you have your own work to find and your own hunger to manage. And whatever happens inside that room is not something you have been invited to understand. This is the machinery of the silence, and it runs on ordinary things. It runs on thin walls and low wages, and the unspoken agreement that neighbors do not interfere with each other's lives. It runs on the particular exhaustion of poverty, which narrows the field of attention to the immediate and the personal, your own stove, your own bread, your own children, and leaves very little energy for the troubles of strangers. It runs on the knowledge that Haarmann has connections, that he is useful to people who have authority, and that making trouble for him might mean making trouble for yourself. And it runs, perhaps most of all, on the simple fact that the boys who come to his room are not anyone's boys. They are not local. They are not known. They do not have families in Hanover who will come asking questions. They are drifters, runaways, the unclaimed and the uncounted. And in a city where thousands of people are struggling to feed themselves, the disappearance of a boy with no surname and no address does not leave a hole that anyone is equipped to notice. Haarmann keeps his room clean. This is something the neighbors mention later, when the questions finally come, and it is worth pausing over, because cleanliness in a tenement like this is not a small thing. It requires effort. Water must be carried up from the pump in the courtyard or from the shared tap on the landing. Cloths must be wrung and hung and dried. Floors must be scrubbed on hands and knees. The stove must be emptied of ash and the grate cleaned and the area around it swept free of the fine black dust that settles on everything when coal or briquettes are burned. Haarmann does all of this. He does it regularly. He does it with a thoroughness that his neighbors do not always match, and he does it, they will say later, most carefully on the mornings after the boys have visited. There is another thing. The bucket. Haarmann carries a bucket down the stairs and out into the courtyard with some regularity, more often, it seems, than a single man living in a single room would need to empty a slop pail. The bucket is covered. He carries it steadily, without hurrying, and he empties it into the drain or the refuse pit behind the building. And he carries it back up the stairs, rinsed and clean. Sometimes he carries bundles as well, wrapped in cloth or newspaper, tied with string, carried under his arm or in a sack slung over his shoulder. These he takes out of the building and into the streets, toward the markets or toward the river or toward some destination that no one in the building tracks, because a man who deals in second-hand goods is always carrying bundles somewhere. The lane is not far. You can walk to the river from the Cellerstrasse in a quarter of an hour, less if you know the shortcuts through the narrow alleys that run between the tenement blocks. The river is slow here and dark, and it moves through the city without attracting much attention. It is not a scenic river. It is a working river, bordered by warehouses and small factories in the backs of buildings that face away from the water as if embarrassed by it. At night, the banks are empty. The water is black. The sound it makes against the stone embankment is low and continuous, and it covers other sounds. The sound of something heavy entering the water, for instance, or the sound of a man's footsteps retreating along the bank afterward. You are back in the room now. It is morning. The lamp has been turned out, and the thin courtyard light has returned. The stove is warm. Haarmann has risen early and relit it, and the room smells of coal smoke and something cooking, a pan of dripping with bread fried in it perhaps, or a bit of sausage heated through. The bed has been stripped and the sheets folded. The floor, you notice, is damp near the washstand, as though it has been scrubbed recently. The basin on the stand has been emptied and rinsed. Everything's in its place. The chair is pushed in neatly against the table. The wardrobe door is shut and held with its wire loop. There is a pair of shoes by the door that were not there the night before. Newer than Haarmann's usual shoes, smaller, not the right size for him. He is sitting at the table, eating, and he looks up when he hears the neighbour on the landing. And he nods, and he says good morning in that easy way of his, and the neighbour says good morning back, and neither of them mentions the sound from the night before, or the shoes, or the smell in the hallway that has almost faded by now, replaced by the coal smoke and the frying fat and the cold morning air coming in through the cracked window. The building goes on. The day begins. The stove ticks. Somewhere upstairs the woman is filling her basin. Somewhere below the child is crying again, and a man is pulling on his boots, and a door opens and closes, and footsteps descend the stairs and pass out into the street, and the city absorbs another morning without remark. The shoes by the door will be gone by evening. They will appear, within a day or two, on the stall in one of the open-air markets near the station, priced cheaply, sold to someone who needs a pair of shoes and does not ask where they came from. And the room on the Cellerstrasse will be clean again, and quiet again, and waiting again for the next soft knock on the door, the next set of footsteps on the stairs, the next boy with a cloth bag and no one expecting him home. The stove ticks on. The plaster breathes. The hallway holds its smell for a little while longer, and then it lets it go, and the building closes over the night like still water closing over a stone. You need to understand the trains. Not the trains themselves. The iron and the coal and the schedules posted on boards that no one can read in the dark. But what the trains carry and what they leave behind. You need to understand that in these years, in the early 1920s, the railway system of northern Germany is not merely a way of getting from one place to another. It is a current. It is a slow, steady, unceasing current that moves human beings from the places where they are no longer wanted to the places where they are not yet known. And it does this without regard for age or readiness or any of the things that a family or a parish or a school might once have provided before the war broke everything open. You are standing on the platform at Hanover Hauptbahnhof, and it is a weekday afternoon in the autumn of 1921. The light is already thinning. The lamps along the platform have been lit, though they do little more than mark the edges of the space in smudges of yellow against the grey. A train has just arrived from the south. From Göttingen perhaps, or from one of the smaller towns along the line, and among the passengers stepping down onto the platform, you can pick them out almost immediately. The boys. They are not hard to identify. They are the ones who do not walk with purpose toward the exit. They are the ones who stand for a moment after stepping down, looking at the station hall as if it is larger than anything they have seen before, or as if the noise and the crowd and the smell of coal smoke and bodies have made them suddenly uncertain about whatever decision brought them here. They carry their possessions in cloth bags or in small battered suitcases held shut with twine. Their coats are too large or too small. Their shoes are worn through at the soles. Some of them are bareheaded. Some of them are very young. You watch one of them. He is perhaps 15. Though it is difficult to say with certainty, hunger and hard work age a boy unevenly, making the face older than the body, or the body older than the face. And this boy has the drawn, narrow look of someone who has not been eating enough for a long time. His hair is cut short and unevenly, as if someone did it with kitchen shears. His coat is a man's coat, too wide in the shoulders, the sleeves turned up at the cuffs. He carries a bag made from an old flour sack, and inside it, you can tell by the shape, there is very little. A change of underclothing, perhaps. A piece of bread wrapped in paper. A folded letter that he has read many times and that tells him nothing useful about what to do when he arrives. He has come from a farm, not his family's farm. His family does not have a farm, but a farm where he was placed as a labourer some time after the war. One of thousands of boys sent out from orphanages and poorhouses and overwhelmed parish offices to work in the countryside, in exchange for room and board and, in theory, a small wage that was often never paid. The arrangement is common in these years. It is not slavery exactly, but it is not freedom either. The boys sleep in barns or in unheated outbuildings. They eat what the family eats, which in a bad year is not much. They work from before dawn until after dark during the harvest months, and in winter they do the work that no one else wants to do. Mucking stalls, hauling water, splitting wood in the cold until their hands crack open along the knuckles. Some of the farmers are decent. Some of them are not. And when a boy runs, when he slips away one morning before the household is awake and walks to the nearest station and gets on a train without a ticket, the farmer may report him to the local authorities, or he may simply shrug and request another boy from the same office that sent the first one. No one follows. That is the thing you must understand. No one comes after these boys. The institutions that place them do not have the staff or the funding to track every runaway. The police in the smaller towns have other concerns. The families, where families exist, are often the reason the boy left in the first place. A father who drinks, a mother who has died, a stepfather who uses his hands too freely, a household with too many mouths and not enough bread. The parish offices file a report sometimes, and the report sits in a drawer, and the drawer sits in an office that is understaffed and overworked, and the boy, meanwhile, is on a train to Hanover or Hamburg or Berlin, and by the time anyone thinks to look for him, if anyone thinks to look for him at all, he has become a name on a list that no one reads. You watch the boy cross the station hall. He moves slowly, close to the wall, as if the open space in the centre is too exposed. He passes the ticket windows and the newspaper kiosk and the bench, where 3 older men are sitting with the particular stillness of people who have been sitting for a long time. He reaches the main exit and stops. He looks out at the street. The street is wet. The buildings across the road are tall and soot-darkened and close together, and the sky above them is the colour of old pewter, and there is nothing in what he sees that tells him where to go or what to do next. This is the moment. This is the gap in the world through which boys fall, and it is wider in these years than it has ever been. The old structures that might once have caught them, the guild systems, the church apprenticeships, the extended family networks of the small towns, have been weakened or destroyed by the war and its aftermath. The new structures that will eventually replace them, the Weimar welfare reforms, the youth offices, the organised shelters, are still being built, still being argued over in committee rooms in Berlin, still years away from being funded and staffed and made to function at the scale the crisis demands. In the meantime, there is only the station and the street and the cold and the particular knowledge that comes to a boy very quickly in a city like this, that no one is watching and no one is waiting, and the only people who will speak to you are the ones who want something from you. The Hanover Youth Welfare Office exists. It is located in a building not far from the Rathaus, and it is staffed by civil servants who are, for the most part, doing what they can with what they have, which is not enough. The office handles cases of abandoned children, delinquent minors, vagrant youth, and the broad, ungovernable category of young people who have slipped out of every system meant to hold them. The caseloads are enormous. A single welfare officer may be responsible for dozens of cases at a time, each one a boy or a girl with a particular history and a particular need, and the officer has neither the time nor the resources to visit them all, to check on them all, the resources to visit them all. To Veshek, the boy who was placed with a family in March, is still with that family in October. The files accumulate. The names pile up. And when a name disappears from the system, when a boy simply stops appearing at the address where he was last recorded, The disappearance is noted, if it is noted at all, as an administrative matter, not as an emergency. You think about the names. You will hear some of them later, when the trial comes, when the parents and the relatives sit in the courtroom and describe their sons, and the descriptions will have a terrible similarity that is not a coincidence, but a portrait of the same conditions repeated across hundreds and thousands of households in Lower Saxony and beyond. Friedel Rother, Wilhelm Schulz, Roland Hooch, Fritz Franke, Wilhelm Erdner, Hermann Wolf, Heinz Brinkmann, Adolf Hannepel, Robert Weitzel, Fritz Wittig, Ernst Ehrenberg, Heinrich Struff, Paul Bruniszewski, Richard Graf. These are some of the names, though the full list was never established with certainty, and there are others whose names are known only from entries in missing persons registers that were filed and forgotten long before anyone thought to connect them to a single room on the Cellerstrasse. They came from everywhere, from small towns in the Harz, from villages along the Weser, from farms in the flatlands south of Bremen, from Kassel and Göttingen and the industrial towns of the Ruhr. Some came from as far as Silesia or Pomerania, though most were from within a day's train journey of Hanover. They were the sons of labourers, of widows, of men killed in the war, of families broken by poverty or illness or the particular grinding despair of the post-war years. Some had been in institutions, reformatories, church-run homes, municipal orphanages, and had left or been released. Some had simply walked away from whatever arrangement was supposed to be keeping them. They ranged in age from their early teens to their early 20s, though most were between 15 and 19, and they had in common the one quality that made them visible to Haarmann and invisible to everyone else. They were alone. You understand what alone means in this context. It does not mean merely solitary. It means unanchored. It means that there is no person in the city of Hanover who knows this boy's name, who expects him at a certain hour, who will ask where he was last night, who will notice the empty chair at the table. It means that his entire existence in this city is held in his own body and in whatever he carries in his bag. And when that body is gone, there is nothing left to mark the space where he was. No landlord will report a missing tenant, because he was never a tenant. No employer will wonder why he did not come to work, because he never had work. No neighbour will mention that the young man from the second floor has not been seen in a week, because he was never from the second floor of anywhere. He was passing through. He was on his way to somewhere. He stopped in Hanover because the train stopped in Hanover, or because someone told him there were jobs in Hanover, or because he had run out of money and could not go any farther, and within a day or two of arriving, he has met a friendly day or two of arriving, he has met a friendly, talkative man at the station who has offered him a meal and a place to sleep. You should know how the meeting happens, because it is always the same in its essentials, though the details shift from boy to boy. Haarmann approaches. He is casual. He is warm. He may show his police identification. He does this often, according to later testimony. And this transforms him, in the boy's eyes, from a stranger into something closer to an authority figure, someone who is supposed to be there, someone who is supposed to be there, someone whose attention is official and therefore safe. He asks the boy's name. He asks where the boy has come from. He asks if the boy has eaten. The answer to this last question is almost always no, or not recently, or not properly. And Haarmann responds to this with a generosity that feels, in the moment, entirely genuine. He buys the boy food, or he takes him to his room and cooks for him, and the boy eats, and for the first time in days or weeks the boy is warm and fed and sitting in a room with a closed door and a stove that works, and the man across the table is smiling and talking and asking nothing in return except the pleasure of company. Some of the boys stay one night. Some stay several nights. Some come and go. The pattern is not rigid, and this is part of what makes it so difficult to see from the outside. Haarmann's room is a place where boys from the station drift in and drift out, and for most of the neighbours and most of the police and most of the welfare officers who occasionally hear Haarmann's name mentioned in connection with the vagrant youth at the station, this arrangement looks like charity, or at least like the rough, informal kind of social work that fills the gaps in a system that has too many gaps to fill properly. And then a boy disappears. Not in any way that anyone notices at the time, but in the quiet way that things disappear in a city that is not keeping count. He was here, and then he was not here, and the only person who knows the difference is the man in whose room he was last seen, and that man does not say a word. The boy's bag goes into the wardrobe or under the bed. His coat goes onto the hook behind the door. His shoes, if they are worth anything, go to the market, and the boy himself goes to the river, or to the drain, or to wherever it is that the parts of him go that cannot be sold or burned or buried in the small hours of the morning when the building is asleep. You think about the parents. You will hear from them later, at the trial, and what they say will be among the most difficult things in the entire record to bear, because what they describe is not a single moment of loss, but a long, formless, unresolvable waiting. A mother in Kassel who wrote letters to the Hanover police asking if her son had been seen. A father who travelled to the city himself and walked through the streets near the station, showing a photograph to strangers, and was told by the police that boys like his son disappear all the time. That there is nothing to be done, that he should go home and wait. A grandmother who filed a report with the welfare office and was told that the office was doing everything it could, which meant, in practice, that a name was added to a list, and the list was placed in a file, and the file was placed in a cabinet, and no one opened it again until the bones began to surface in the river 3 years later. The system did not fail these families in any single dramatic way. It failed them in the ordinary way that systems fail when they are overwhelmed and underfunded, and staffed by people who are themselves barely managing. It failed them through slowness, through paper, through the passive assumption that a missing boy had probably run off somewhere and would turn up eventually. Because boys do that. Because this is what happens in hard times. Because there are too many missing boys to investigate each one, as if something terrible had happened. The reports were filed. The letters were answered, when they were answered at all, with the careful, empty language of bureaucracy that says everything and promises nothing. And the months passed. And the boys did not come home. You are standing at the station again. It is late now. The platform is emptier than it was in the afternoon, but not empty. There are still figures moving through the hall, travellers waiting for connections, workers finishing late shifts, and the permanent ghostly population of the station itself, the ones who have nowhere else to be. You see a boy sitting on a bench near the far wall, his head tipped back against the stone, his eyes closed, his bag on the floor between his feet. He is thin and still, and he might be sleeping, or he might simply be resting in the way that people rest when they have been moving for a long time and have finally stopped, not because they have arrived somewhere, but because their body has decided to stop whether they want it to or not. A man walks toward him. The man is not tall. He has a round face and a steady way of walking, and he is carrying a small paper bag, something from a bakery perhaps, or from one of the stalls outside the station that sell roasted chestnuts and cheap sausage in the evening. He sits down beside the boy. He opens the bag and offers it. The boy opens his eyes. He looks at the man, and at the bag, and at the food inside it, and you can see the calculation happening behind his face. Not suspicion exactly, but the brief, practiced assessment of a boy who has learned that nothing is free and that kindness from strangers usually has a shape you cannot see, until it is too late. But he is hungry. He is very hungry. And the man is smiling, and the food is warm, and the station is cold, and it is late, and there is nowhere else to go tonight. The boy takes the food. He eats. The man talks, and after a while they stand together, and they walk toward the exit, and the station closes over the space where they were sitting, and the bench is empty, and the light from the platform lamps falls on the stone floor where the boy's bag was resting a moment ago. You listen. The trains are still running, faintly, somewhere beyond the station walls. The sound comes and goes. A low hum of metal on rail, a whistle thinned by distance. The slow clatter of wheels slowing as another train approaches the platform, carrying more passengers, more travellers, more boys with cloth bags and uncertain faces, arriving into the grey damp of a city that does not know their names and will not remember them. The bench stays empty. The station breathes its cold metallic breath, and the trains keep coming, one after another, through the long winter evenings, delivering their cargo to the platform and pulling away again into the dark, lighter than when they arrived. You first hear the name in passing, the way you hear most names in the Nordstadt, spoken by someone who is not speaking to you, dropped into a conversation at a market stall, or muttered in the hallway of a tenement where the walls carry everything. Grans. Hans Grans. A young man. Local. Not one of the drifters from the station, not one of the boys who arrived by train with cloth bags and nowhere to sleep. Grans is from Hanover. He was born here in 1901. The son of a librarian. and he grew up in the same streets where Haarmann moved so freely, though their lives did not cross until sometime around 1919, when Granz was 18 years old and already well acquainted with the underside of the city. The petty theft, the black market trade, the particular economy of favours and small crimes that sustains a certain class of young man in these years, when legitimate work is scarce, and the distance between respectability and the gutter is measured in bills. You see him for the first time on the Cellerstrasse, or perhaps near the station, or perhaps in one of the beer halls along the Engelbosbler Dam, where men sit close together in the evenings, and the air is thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of cheap lager and damp overcoats drying slowly in the warmth. He is young, noticeably young, even in a neighbourhood where youth is common. He is slender and good-looking in a sharp, restless way, with the kind of face that draws attention and knows it draws attention, and has learned to use this knowledge in small, practical ways. He does not have the defeated look of the boys at the station. He is not hungry, or if he is, he carries his hunger differently, with impatience rather than resignation, as if the world owes him something that he has not yet figured out how to collect. Haarmann is drawn to him. This much is clear from everything that follows, though the precise nature of the attachment is something that the court will later struggle to define, and that the newspapers will describe in the coded, uneasy language of the period. Haarmann is 40 years old when they meet, or close to it. Granz is less than half his age. The older man is established in the neighbourhood, known, connected, comfortable in his role as informant and trader, and the man at the station who helps the boys. The younger man has none of this, only quickness and confidence, and a willingness to take what is offered without the burden of gratitude. They become companions. They are seen together constantly. At the markets, in the streets, at the lodgings on the Cellerstrasse, where Granz begins to stay with increasing regularity, until he is, for all practical purposes, living in Haarmann's room. You notice the change in Haarmann. It is not dramatic. He is still the same round-faced, talkative man who greets the neighbours and carries his bundles and moves through the station crowd with that unsettling ease. But there is something different in the way he holds himself when Granz is nearby. He is attentive. He is eager. He defers to the younger man in small ways that the people around them find faintly ridiculous and faintly uncomfortable. Fetching things, offering the better chair, agreeing too quickly with whatever Granz has said. The dynamic between them is not equal, and it is not equal in a direction that surprises the neighbours, because it is the older man, the one with the connections and the money and the reputation, who seems to need the younger one more than the younger one needs him. Granz, for his part, accepts all of this with a cool and practised ease. He wears the clothes that Haarmann provides. He eats the food that Haarmann buys. He sleeps in the room that Haarmann pays for. And he involves himself, gradually, and then not gradually at all, in the business of the room. The trade in second-hand goods, the dealings at the market stalls, the traffic in coats and trousers and shoes and personal items that come from sources Granz does not ask about and does not need to ask about because he is not stupid, and because the answer, if he were to hear it spoken plainly, would not change anything about the arrangement. You are in the room on the Cellerstrasse on an evening when both of them are home. The stove is lit. The lamp is burning. Granz is sitting at the table, turning a coat over in his hands. Not Haarmann's coat, and not his own. It is a good coat, better than what you usually see in this neighbourhood, with a wool lining and buttons that are still firmly attached, and a cut that suggests it was made for someone with narrower shoulders than Haarmann. Granz examines it with the appraising eye of a man who knows the second-hand market, who knows what a coat like this will fetch, who has already calculated the price in his head before he has finished running his thumb along the seam. He says something to Haarmann. You cannot hear it clearly, but the tone is proprietary, almost casual, the tone of someone who considers himself entitled to an opinion about how the household business is conducted. Haarmann responds quickly, agreeably, as if the younger man's approval is something he is anxious to secure. This is the passion. Granz takes an interest in the clothing. Granz takes an interest in the shoes. Granz takes an interest in the particular items that a boy might carry on his person. A watch, a ring, a pocket knife, a pair of gloves. And this interest is not passive. He expresses preferences. He tells Haarmann what to keep and what to sell. He tells him, according to testimony that will be offered at the trial and disputed fiercely by the defence, which boys have things worth taking, which boys are wearing the better coat, which boys should be brought back to the room, and which should be left alone. The prosecution will argue that Granz actively selected victims on the basis of what they owned, that he pointed boys out at the station or in the streets and told Haarmann that he wanted their clothing, and that this amounted to a direct incitement to murder. Granz will deny this. He will deny all of it. He will say that he knew nothing, that he suspected nothing, that the clothing came from Haarmann's legitimate trade, and that the boys who visited the room left of their own accord and went on their way. The court will not believe him entirely, but the court will also find it difficult to prove, with the precision that the law requires, exactly what Granz knew and when he knew it, and whether his knowledge made him a participant in the killings, or merely a beneficiary of them. You think about this distinction, the line between knowing and participating, between profiting from a crime and committing it, and you realize that it is a line drawn on water. In the room on the Cellerstrasse, with the stove ticking and the lamp burning and the thin walls carrying every sound, the distinction dissolves into the ordinary texture of shared life. Granz is there. Granz is always there, or nearly always. He is there when the boys come in. He is there when they eat. He is there when they stay the night. And he is there in the mornings when the room has been scrubbed and the basin emptied and a new set of clothing has appeared in the wardrobe. And if he does not know what happened between the evening and the morning, it is because he has chosen not to know, which is a different thing from innocence and a thing the law has always struggled to name properly. The relationship reshapes the rhythm of the crimes. Before Granz, the killings were, as much as such a word can be used, irregular. Haarmann brought boys home from the station, and some of them were killed, and the intervals between the killings were uneven and difficult to reconstruct from the fragmentary record that survived. After Granz, there is a shift. The pace seems to quicken. The selection of victims becomes, according to the later investigation, less random. Haarmann is no longer acting only on his own impulses. He is acting, at least in part, in response to another person's desires. For a particular coat, for a particular pair of boots, for the things that a particular boy is carrying. And this external pressure adds a new and terrible logic to what was already a terrible thing. He should understand that this is not a partnership of equals in any sense. Haarmann is the older man, the stronger man, the man who does what is done in the room at night, and Granz is the younger man who benefits from the proceeds and who does not, as far as the evidence establishes, put his own hands to the killing. But the absence of physical participation does not settle the moral question, and it does not settle the legal question, and it will not settle the question in the minds of the people of Hanover, who will sit in the courtroom in December 1924 and watch these two men, the heavy, animated, oddly forthcoming Haarmann and the cool, composed, carefully evasive Granz, and try to understand what they were to each other and what that understanding means for the allocation of guilt. You are walking through the market near the Hauptbahnhof on a cold morning, and you pass a stall where second-hand clothing is laid out on a plank table. Coats, trousers, shirts, caps, a row of shoes arranged by size. The man behind the table is Haarmann, and beside him, leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets, is Granz. They are selling. They sell often. The stall is not permanent. It moves from market to market, appearing here one week and there the next, but the goods are plentiful and they are cheap, and the buyers do not ask questions, because the entire market is built on the principle of not asking questions. A woman picks up a coat, a boy's coat, you notice, sized for someone in his middle teens, and she holds it up and checks the lining and runs a hand along the collar, and she asks the price, and Haarmann tells her, and she pays, and she folds the coat over her arm and walks away, and neither she nor anyone else at the market thinks to wonder why a man in his 40s is selling so many garments that belong to young men who are not present and who are never mentioned. Granz watches the sale with a detached, faintly proprietary air. The money goes into his pocket as often as it goes into Haarmann's. The arrangement between them is financial as well as personal, and the finances, like everything else in the relationship, flow in a direction that favors the younger man. Haarmann provides. Granz consumes. Haarmann works, if the word can be applied to what he does. And Granz takes his share of the proceeds and spends it on the things that young men in the Nordstadt spend money on: beer, tobacco, a meal at a restaurant that is slightly better than what the tenement stove can produce, a piece of clothing for himself that is new rather than second-hand, a small assertion of status in a world where status is measured in very small things. There is a moment. You cannot date it precisely because the testimony on this point is contradictory and the records are incomplete, when the balance between them shifts, or seems to shift. Granz begins to assert himself more openly. He is seen arguing with Haarmann in the street, on the stairs, in the doorway of the room. The arguments are about money, sometimes, and about the younger man's demands, and about the older man's inability or unwillingness to satisfy them quickly enough. Haarmann, who is talkative and indiscreet in almost every other area of his life, becomes cautious when it comes to Granz. He does not speak against him. He does not complain about the arguments. He absorbs the younger man's displeasure the way the tenement walls absorb the smell of cooking, silently, steadily, without visible resistance. You wonder what this means. You wonder if Granz understands, fully and clearly, the source of the goods he is selling and the money he is spending, and whether this understanding gives him a power over Haarmann that is never spoken aloud, but that operates constantly, like a draft beneath a closed door. You wonder if the arguments are not really about money at all, that about the unspoken thing between them, the knowledge that Granz holds, and that Haarmann cannot afford to have spoken. You wonder these things, but you do not know, and the trial will not answer them satisfactorily, and the historians who come afterward will disagree, and the truth will remain where it has always been in this story, in the room, behind the closed door, in the space between two people who share a stove, and a bed, and a secret that grows heavier with each passing week. The neighbours on the Cellerstrasse notice Granz. They notice him because he is young and because he is always there, and because his presence in Haarmann's life has a quality that is difficult to ignore, even in a building where ignoring things is the primary social skill. The woman upstairs hears two voices now instead of one. The man across the hall sees two figures on the stairs. The landlord receives the rent from Haarmann as always, but the money comes a little less regularly now, as if the household's expenses have increased, and there are small disputes about the condition of the room, and about noise, and about the visitors who come and go at unusual hours. But no one presses the matter. The police connection still holds. The name of the criminal Polizei still hangs over the room like a ward against curiosity, and the neighbours retreat behind their own doors and their own concerns, and leave the two men to whatever it is they are doing in the room, with the thin walls and the stove that ticks through the long evenings. You are in the hallway again. It is late. The building is quiet. You can hear the murmur of voices behind Haarmann's door. Two voices, speaking in low tones, one steady and one sharp. There is a pause. Then the sound of movement. Then the scrape of something being dragged across the floor. Not heavy exactly, but deliberate, with the care of people who are trying not to make more noise than necessary. You hear the stove door open and close. You smell coal smoke and something else. Something sweet and metallic and wrong, the same smell you have noticed before in this hallway, the smell that never quite belongs to the building's ordinary catalogue of tenement odours. You stand very still. The floorboards are cold under your feet. The draught from the stairwell pushes against your ankles. From inside the room there is silence now, and then a low conversation resumes, and then the sound of water being poured into the basin, and then the slow wringing of cloth, and then stillness, and then the stove settling, and then nothing. You go to your room. You close the door. You lie in the dark and listen to the building, and the building does not tell you anything it has not already told you, which is everything and nothing at once. The stove on the other side of the wall ticks once more, and then the night absorbs it, and the two men in the room are left to their silence, and the city outside the window goes on breathing in its sleep, unaware and unasking, holding its questions for a later hour that has not yet come. You smell the market before you see it. The air changes as you turn the corner from the Nikolaistrasse toward the Topol ground near the Bollhof, where the stalls are set nut blankets spread directly on the cobblestones. And the smell is the smell of a city selling itself piece by piece, old leather, camphor, the faint sourness of wool that has been stored too long in a trunk without airing, the dusty sweetness of cotton garments pressed together in stacks, shoe polish applied over shoe polish until the leather, beneath has forgot ear's vergirkt packed als It is a morning in the early months of 1923, and the market is full, because the market is always full in these years, because the ordinary economy of Hanover has collapsed so thoroughly that the extraordinary economy, the economy of barter, of resale, of goods changing hands outside any shop or ledger, has become the ordinary one. You walk between the stalls. The sellers stand behind their tables or squat beside their blankets, and their faces have the particular patience of people who have been doing this long enough, that the cold no longer registers as discomfort, but simply as the condition under which business is conducted. They wear layers, 2 coats, sometimes 3, with scarves wound around the neck and tucked into the collar, and gloves with the fingertips cut away so they can handle coins and count change without removing them. Their breath clouds in front of them. The cobblestones are wet, and the damp comes up through the soles of your shoes and settles into the bones of your feet within minutes. You learn to shift your weight from one foot to the other, the way the sellers do, a slow, unconscious rocking that keeps the blood moving. The goods on display are everything and nothing. There are coats. There are trousers. There are shirts, some of them folded neatly, some of them piled in heaps that the buyer must sort through with both hands. There are shoes, always shoes, because shoes are the thing that wears out fastest and costs the most to replace, and a decent pair of shoes in a market like this will sell before midday without fail. There are hats, caps, scarves, belts, braces, undergarments laid out with a frankness that would have seemed indecent in a proper shop, but that here, in the open air, among people who cannot afford propriety, is simply practical. There are household items, pots with dented rims, spoons with bent handles, chipped enamel basins, oil lamps missing their glass chimneys, and blankets so thin from washing that you can see daylight through them when you hold them up. Nothing here is new. Everything here has been owned before, used before, worn before, slept under before, and the transaction that takes place at each stall is not really a purchase in the usual sense, but a transfer, a passing of objects from one set of hands to another, from one life to another, with no questions asked about where they came from or why they are being sold. This is the rule of the market, and it is absolute. You do not ask. The seller does not explain. The price is the price. And if you do not like it, you move to the next stall. And if you cannot find what you need at a price you can pay, you come back tomorrow, because there will be more tomorrow. There is always more. The supply of second-hand goods in a city this poor is inexhaustible. The black market. Though the word suggests something hidden, something criminal, and the reality is far more open than that, operates under the protection of collective necessity. The police know about it. The municipal authorities know about it. Everyone knows about it. And because everyone is either buying or selling or both, the market exists in a kind of civic twilight, tolerated because it cannot be stopped, and because stopping it would mean admitting that the official economy has failed entirely, which everyone already knows, but no one in a position of authority is prepared to say aloud. You find Haarmann's stall. It is not always in the same place. He moves it, as the other sellers do, from market to market, from the Baulhof to the Engelbosteler Dam, to the streets near the station, to the smaller, less regulated selling grounds on the edges of the Nordstadt, where the police patrols are thinner and the goods on offer are more questionable. Today he is near the centre of the market, his table set up between a woman selling kitchen implements and an older man with a collection of tools spread on a piece of canvas. Haarmann's table is well stocked. There are coats, 4, 5, 6 of them, folded and stacked, and trousers and shirts and a row of shoes arranged in pairs along the front edge of the table. The quality is noticeable. Not fine quality, not the kind of clothing you would see in a shop on the Gordstrasse, but better than what most of the other stalls are offering. Newer, less worn, with buttons still attached and linings still intact, and soles that have not yet been walked through. This is one of the reasons Haarmann's stall does well. His goods are a step above. People come to him when they need something decent, something that will last a season, something that does not look like it has already been through 3 owners and a war. Grans is there. He is leaning against the wall of the building behind the stall, smoking, watching the buyers move past with an expression that hovers between boredom and appraisal. He is wearing a coat that you have not seen on him before. Dark wool, well cut, with a collar that turns up neatly against the wind. It fits him well. It fits him, in fact, as if it were made for someone of exactly his build, which it may have been, though not for him. He does not help with the selling. He does not fold the garments or arrange the shoes or engage the buyers in the easy patter that Haarmann uses to move his stock. He simply stands and smokes and watches, and occasionally he says something to Haarmann in a low voice, and Haarmann nods, and the day goes on. A woman approaches the stall. She is looking for a coat for her son. She says this without embarrassment, because there is no embarrassment in a market like this. Only need, openly stated, and the hope that the need can be met at a price she can afford. Haarmann is immediately attentive. He reaches for the stack of coats and begins to sort through them, holding each one up briefly, assessing the size with his eye. discarding the ones that are too large or too small. He finds one, a grey wool coat with a half belt in the back and bone buttons, sized for a boy of perhaps 16 or 17, and he holds it out to the woman and tells her the price. She touches the fabric. She checks the seam under the arm, the way women in this city check every garment, looking for the weak point, the place where the thread has begun to give. The seam is sound. The coat is in good condition. It has not been worn long. The woman pays and takes the coat and folds it over her arm and walks away into the crowd, and you watch her go, and you think about her son putting on the coat this evening, sliding his arms into the sleeves, feeling the wool against his wrists, standing in front of whatever small mirror the household owns, and seeing himself in someone else's coat, without knowing whose coat it was, or why it was for sale, or where the boy who wore it before him has gone. You think about this, and you hold it in your mind as you walk through the rest of the market, because this is the thing that the market does. It launders. Not money, though money is laundered here too in its way, but identity. Every object on every table in this market has been separated from the person who owned it, and the separation is complete and final. The coat is no longer Friedel Roth's coat, or Fritz Frankie's coat, or anyone's coat. It is a coat on a table, priced at a certain number of marks, available to anyone who can pay. The shoes are no longer anyone's shoes. The watch is no longer anyone's watch. The personal has been made impersonal, and the transaction seals the transformation, because once the woman has paid for the coat and taken it home, it belongs to her son, and the chain of ownership that connected it to a boy who stepped off a train at the Hauptbahnhof and followed a friendly man home to the Cellerstrasse has been broken as cleanly as if it had never existed. Haarmann understands this. He understands it with the practical intelligence of a man who has been buying and selling in these markets for years, who knows how the system works, who knows that the market's appetite for goods is bottomless and its curiosity about origins is non-existent. He sells openly. He sells frequently. He sells in quantities that would, in a different time or a different economy, attract attention. How does a single man, living in a rented room on the Cellerstrasse, come to have so many coats, so many pairs of trousers, so many shoes in so many different sizes? But this is not a different time. This is Hanover in 1923, and the answer to that question is the same answer that covers everything in the black market. He got them somewhere, and it does not matter where, because everyone here got their goods somewhere, and the whole structure of the market rests on the agreement not to look too closely at the somewhere. And the whole structure of the market rests on the agreement not to look too closely at the somewhere. There are moments, though, small moments, easily missed, when the somewhere presses against the surface. A father arrives in Hanover looking for his son. He has travelled from a town in the Harz, and he has been to the police, and the police have told him what they tell everyone, which is that they will look into it, and he has walked the streets near the station, and he has shown a photograph to the stallholders in the market, and one of them, not Haarmann, but a man at a neighbouring stall, has looked at the photograph and then looked away and said no, he has not seen the boy, but there is something in the way he looks away that is not quite the blankness of a man who genuinely does not recognize. It is the blankness of a man who does not want to recognize it, who has perhaps seen a coat or a pair of shoes on Haarmann's table that reminded him of something, that stirred a thought he was not willing to follow to its conclusion. The father moves on. He does not find his son. He goes home to the Harz with nothing except the memory of a city that swallowed his child and gave him back only silence. And the market goes on, and Haarmann's stall goes on, and the coats and trousers and shoes keep appearing on the table as if generated by the same mysterious, self-renewing source that supplies the coal and the turnips and the grey bread and everything else that the city consumes without thinking about where it comes from. You should know about the clothing in particular, because the clothing is what will eventually connect the disappearances to Haarmann, though the connection will not be made for years. The boys who came to the station were poorly dressed, most of them, but they were dressed. Each one had a coat, a pair of trousers, a shirt, a pair of shoes, the basic minimum that a person carries on his body through the world. And when they disappeared, their clothing did not disappear with them. It surfaced. It moved through Haarmann's hands and through Granz's hands and onto the tables of the second-hand market and into the homes of buyers who had no reason to know what they were buying. Some of it was altered, buttons replaced, linings removed, identifying marks cut out with a knife or picked apart with a seam ripper. Some of it was sold as it was, without any modification at all, because in a market where no one asks questions, Modification is an unnecessary precaution. Later, during the investigation, the police will attempt to trace some of these garments. They will visit the markets and the second-hand shops and the households that bought from Haarmann, and they will collect coats and trousers and shoes and lay them out in rows and ask the parents of the missing boys to come and look, and some of the parents will identify the clothing. This was my son's coat. These were my son's shoes. I recognized the mend on the left knee. I sewed that patch myself before he left. And the identifications will be entered into the record and presented at the trial as evidence of what happened to the boys after they entered Haarmann's room and did not come out. But most of the clothing will never be identified, because most of it looked like every other piece of poor men's clothing in the city, and because the boys' families, when they existed, were often too far away or too poor to travel to Hanover for the identification, and because time and use and the ordinary wear of daily life had changed the garments beyond recognition. You pass a stall selling shoes. There are a dozen pairs, maybe more, laid out on a board. You stop and look at them. They are boys' shoes mostly. Small, scuffed, with leather uppers and soles that have been resoled once or twice. One pair catches your eye. They are brown, lace-up, with a pattern of stitching across the toe that suggests they were not the cheapest shoes available when they were new. They have been polished recently, but the polish cannot hide the crease across the vamp where the foot bent with every step, a crease that has been worn so deeply into the leather that it has become a permanent feature, a record of walking, of a particular foot and a particular gait pressing the same fold into the same piece of leather thousands of times. Someone wore these shoes for a long time. Someone walked in them to school or to work, or along a country road or through the streets of a small town, and the leather remembers this, even if no one else does. You do not buy the shoes. You move on. The market continues around you. The low hum of negotiation, the clink of coins, the rustle of fabric being unfolded and refolded, the steady shuffle of feet on wet cobblestones. The cold presses against your face and your hands. The sky above the market is low and flat and grey, the same grey as the buildings and the cobblestones and the coats on the tables, and the smoke rising from the chimneys of the tenements that line the streets on either side. Everything in this city is grey in winter, and the grey has a weight to it, a physical substance, as if the air itself has absorbed so much coal smoke and damp and poverty that it has thickened into something you can feel against your skin. Haarmann is packing up his stall. The morning's selling is done, and he's folding the remaining garments and stacking them into a suitcase. The same battered suitcase he carries through the streets on market days, heavy when he arrives and lighter when he leaves. Grants has already gone, wandered off toward a beer hall or a billiard room, or wherever it is he spends the afternoons when he is not needed at the stall. Haarmann works alone, folding each garment with a care that seems almost respectful, smoothing the fabric flat before placing it in the case, pairing the remaining shoes and wrapping them in newspaper. He works quickly but not hurriedly, with the practiced efficiency of a man who has done this many times and who will do it again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, for as long as the trains keep bringing boys to the station and the market keeps buying what the boys leave behind. He closes the suitcase. He lifts it. He nods to the woman at the neighbouring stall, who nods back, and he walks away through the thinning crowd, past the last of the sellers, past the swept places on the cobblestones where the blankets have been gathered up and the goods taken away, past the old man with the tools who is still sitting on his canvas because he has nowhere else to be, and the market is the warmest place he knows, even in the cold, because there are people generate a warmth that has nothing to do with temperature. The market empties. The cobblestones darken as the afternoon clouds lower over the city. A few scraps of newspaper blow along the gutter where the stalls were standing an hour ago, and a button lies in the gap between two cobblestones, missed when the table was cleared, too small to pick up, too ordinary to notice. It is a bone button, white, with 4 holes, the kind used on a boy's shirt, and it catches a faint gleam of light as the clouds shift and then goes dull again as the light closes over, and it will lie there in the crack between the stones until the rain washes it into the gutter, and the gutter carries it down to the drain, and the drain carries it away into the dark, under the city, where it joins everything else that Hanover has discarded, without thought and without memory. The stalls are gone now. The square is empty. The sellers have taken their goods home or to storage, and the buyers have taken their purchases back to their rooms and their houses, and the coats are hanging on new hooks, and the shoes are standing by new doors, and the shirts are folded in new drawers, and the shirts are folded in new drawers, and the market has done what markets do, which is to move things from one hand to another, and to erase, in the moving, every trace of the hand that held them before. You will comb through the Nordstadt. The streets are quiet in the early afternoon. The smell of the market stays in your clothing, old leather, camphor, damp wool, and beneath it all the faint, cold mineral smell of coins handled many times by many hands. The stove in your room is out. You light it. You sit beside it and wait for the warmth to reach you. And while you wait, you listen to the building settle around you. The tick of the iron, the creak of the boards, the soft, persistent murmur of other lives being lived on the other side of thin walls, in rooms that look just like yours, by people who are wearing, perhaps at this very moment, the clothes of boys whose names they will never know, and whose absence it will never feel, because the market has made the absence invisible, has turned the personal, has taken six. It doesn't know anymore, and if that lyrics can get shit else, it is dead to death. The stove warms. The room steadies. Outside, the afternoon drains from the sky like water from a basin, and the city pulls its grey cloak a little tighter, and the evening comes on without fanfare, without remark, without anyone stopping in the street to wonder why there are so many good coats for sale this winter, and so few boys at the station who seem to stay for long. You need to understand hunger before you can understand rumour, not the hunger of a missed meal, not the thinning feeling of an afternoon without lunch, but the hunger that has settled into a city-like weather, a hunger that has been present for so long that it has become a feature of daily life rather than an emergency, a hunger that changes the way people think about food, about cost, about origin, about what questions are worth asking and what questions are better left alone. You are standing in the Nordstadt in the winter of 1922, and the hunger here is not new. It arrived during the war, with the British naval blockade that cut off imports and the requisitioning of domestic food production for the front, and it deepened during the turn at winter 1916 and 1917, when the potato crop failed and the government distributed turnips as a substitute for nearly everything, turnip presdet, turnip coffee, turnip jam, and it persisted through the armistice and the inflation that followed, growing worse as the mark lost its value and value in waste. It has ceased to have any relationship to the physical reality of meat is the scarcest thing. You know this from the market, from the queues outside the few butcher shops that are still operating, from the conversations you overhear on the stairs and in the courtyard and at the pump where the women of the tenement gather with their pails and exchange the daily intelligence of survival. Who has potatoes? Who has flour? Who has potatoes? Who has flour? Who has heard of a farmer outside the city selling eggs at a price that is merely outrageous, rather than impossible? Meat, when it is available at all, comes in forms that would not have been considered food before the war. Horse meat is common. It is sold openly in shops that specialize in it, and it is sold less openly by men who appear at the market with cuts wrapped in waxed paper or newspaper and priced according to the quality and the buyer's desperation. The distinction between horse meat and other kinds of meat, pork, beef, the occasional rabbit or goose, is a distinction that matters in theory, but that has been worn thin by years of shortage. You buy what you can afford. You cook it in the way that makes it last the longest. Boiled into broth, stretched with turnips or cabbage or barley, rendered for fat that can be spread on bread, or used to fry the next day's meal. You do not always know exactly what you are eating, and you have learned, through long practice, not to ask. This is the landscape into which the rumour enters, and you must hold this landscape in your mind if you are to understand how the rumour could circulate for as long as it did without being either confirmed or extinguished. The rumour is this, that Friedrich Haarmann, the friendly dealer from the Cellerstrasse, the man with the police connections and the stall at the second-hand market, has been selling meat. Not clothing, not shoes, not household goods, but meat, cuts of it, wrapped in paper, offered to neighbours, to acquaintances, to buyers at the market who know him as a man who always seems to have a little more than everyone else. And the meat, the rumour says, is not what he claims it is. It is not pork. It is not horse. It is something else, something that the rumour does not always name directly, but that hangs in the air of every retelling like the smell in the hallway of the Cellerstrasse building, sweet, wrong, and impossible to identify with certainty. You hear it first from the woman who lives above Haarmann's room. She does not say it plainly. She says it the way people in tenements say things that they are not sure they want to have said, obliquely, with qualifications, with a shrug, that is meant to disown the statement even as it is being made. She says that Haarmann has given her meat on more than one occasion. She says it was good meat, better than what she could buy at the butcher, and cheap, and that he told her it was pork, or that he told her it was horse, or that he did not tell her what it was, and she did not ask. She says that she cooked it, and her family ate it. And it was fine. It tasted like meat. It tasted like pork or something close to pork, and she did not think about it further until later, until the stories began. Until the bones appeared in the river, and then she thought about it, and then she stopped eating anything that Haarmann offered, and then she did not sleep well for a very long time. You hear it from others. A man at the market who says that Haarmann sold meat from a bucket, ladled out in portions, thick and dark. A neighbour who says she saw him carrying a large pan down the stairs, covered with a cloth, and that the smell coming from it was rich and heavy and not quite like any meat she had cooked before. A woman in the next building who says her husband bought sausage from Haarmann, and that the sausage had an unusual taste, not unpleasant, but unfamiliar, and that her husband said it was probably horse, and they should not complain about the taste when the price was so low. These are the testimonies that will surface later when the investigation begins, and they are maddeningly imprecise, full of almost and not quite, and something about it that bothered me, because the people who offer them are not sure what they knew, or when they knew it, or whether what they remember is a true memory, or a memory that has been reshaped by the horror of what came after. The historical record on this point is fractured, and you should understand the fracture before you proceed. At trial, the question of the meat was raised but never fully resolved. Haarmann himself gave contradictory answers. In some of his statements to police, he acknowledged selling meat, or giving meat to neighbours, or disposing of what he called the remains in ways that involved cutting and portioning. In other statements, he denied it, or laughed it off, or said things that seemed designed to shock rather than to clarify. Statements whose reliability is impossible to assess because they were made by a man who was, by the time of his arrest, alternating between confession and performance in ways that the interrogators could not always distinguish. The prosecution presented evidence that Haarmann had been seen with quantities of meat that could not easily be explained by legitimate purchase, and that he had the tools and the domestic setup, the stove, the pans, the bucket, the knives, to prepare and distribute meat from his room. But the prosecution did not attempt to prove, as a specific legal charge, that Haarmann had sold human flesh as food, because the evidence was not strong enough to support such a charge with the certainty the court required, and because the murders themselves were sufficient to secure the verdict that the state was seeking. What remains, then, is not proof but atmosphere, the thick, persistent, unresolvable atmosphere of a rumour that attached itself to the case and never let go. You can feel it in the city. You can feel it in the way people talk about the meat markets in the Nordstadt, in the way a certain kind of silence falls over a conversation when the subject of Haarmann's trade comes up, in the way a woman at the market will pick up a piece of wrapped meat and hold it for a moment longer than necessary before putting it down, not because she suspects anything specific, but because the suspicion has become general, has seeped into the air the way the smell from Haarmann's hallway seeped into the plaster of the building, and it will not come out. You walk through the Markthalle on a morning when the stalls inside are busy with the ordinary commerce of food. Bread, potatoes, cabbage, a few cuts of meat behind glass, sausages hanging in rows from hooks, the heavy, close smell of a covered market in winter, where the heat from the bodies and the stoves has warmed the air just enough to make the smell stronger. You stop at a butcher's counter. The butcher is a heavy man in a stained apron, and behind him there are cuts laid out on a marble slab, dark reddish, glistening faintly with fat. You look at the meat. You look at it the way everyone in Hanover has learned to look at meat in the months since the bones came out of the river, which is to say, with a second glance, a small hesitation, a flicker of something that is not quite suspicion and not quite revulsion, but that lives in the space between the two, where ordinary trust has been disturbed and has not yet settled back into place. The butcher sees you looking. He has seen this look before. Every butcher in Hanover has seen this look before, and they hate it because the rumour has not merely attached itself to Haarmann. It has spread outward from him like a stain, touching every seller of meat in the city, every stall, every shop, every wrapped parcel handed across a counter. The butchers of Hanover will complain about this for years. They will say that the Haarmann case destroyed their trade, that customers stopped buying, that women who had been coming to their shops for decades suddenly began asking questions that had never been asked before. Where does this come from? Can you tell me exactly which farm? Can you show me the paperwork? And at the asking of these questions was itself an accusation, a suggestion that the butcher might not know or might not be willing to say what it was he was selling. You do not ask. You buy your meat or you do not buy it, and you take it home, and you cook it, and you eat it, and you try not to think about the things that the city has been thinking about since the summer of 1924, when the first skulls surfaced along the line and the newspapers began printing stories that connected the missing boys to the friendly man at the station, and the friendly man at the station to the meat that he sold and gave away with such mysterious generosity. You try not to think about it, but you think about it anyway, because the rumor has a gravity that rational thought cannot entirely resist, and because the city has learned something about itself that it did not want to know. That for years, in the markets and the tenements and the ordinary kitchens of the Nordstadt, something may have been consumed that should not have been consumed, and that the consuming was made possible not by deception alone, but by the vast cooperative citywide agreement. Not eating it was not eating, at allting. It was not eating it at was, at all then, but this is the cruelty at the center of the rumor. And it is a cruelty that does not require the rumor to be entirely true in order to function. Whether Haarmann sold human flesh as pork, whether the neighbors ate what he gave them, whether the sausage and the broth and the cuts wrapped in newspaper were what they were whispered to be. These questions have never been answered with finality, and they may never be. What is certain is that the rumor existed, that it circulated, that it was believed by many and doubted by some and feared by nearly everyone, and that its effect on the city was real regardless of its factual basis. The rumor turned every meal into a question. It turned every kitchen into a place where doubt could enter. It turned the act of eating, the most basic, the most domestic, the most intimate of human acts, into a source of horror. Not because of anything dramatic or sudden, but because of the slow, inescapable logic of what might have been done, and what might have been eaten, and what might be sitting in your stomach at this very moment as you lie in your bed and try to sleep. You are in your room now. It is evening. The stove is warm. You have eaten. A bowl of soup, bread, a small piece of meat that you bought at the market this morning, and cooked in a pan with a little fat and an onion cut into thin rings. The meal was ordinary. The meat tasted like meat. The bread tasted like bread. And yet there is a moment, after eating, when you sit at the table with the empty bowl in front of you, and the lamp burning in the building quiet around you, and the thought comes unbidden, unwanted, unstoppable, the thought of the room downstairs, of the stove in that room, of the bucket carried down the stairs, of the smell in the hallway, of the man who always had meat when no one else did, who was generous with it, who offered it to the people around him with a smile and a word, as if feeding the neighborhood were the most natural thing in the world. You push the bowl away. You do not finish what is in it. The stove ticks. The building breathes. Somewhere below, a door opens and closes, and footsteps cross a floor, and a basin is filled and emptied, and the routine of the evening goes on in the same way it goes on every evening in every tenement in the Nordstadt, with the same sounds and the same smells and the same slow settling into the dark hours. And the only difference is that now, tonight, and for many nights to come, there is a thought in your mind that wove, like a thought that sits in the place where trust used to be, small and unremovable, like a bone that lodged in the throat and will neither beloathe. The city carries this thought. It carries it through the winter and into the spring and through the trial and into the years beyond. It carries it in the way that people speak about meat, about the markets, about the Nordstadt, about the years when things were worst and people ate what they could and did not ask. The children's rhyme will come later. The sing-song verse that names Haarmann and the meat and the waiting and the chopping. And it will be sung in the streets and the schoolyards of Hanover for decades, long after the trial is over and the man is dead and the city has rebuilt itself and paved over the cobblestones where the market stalls stood. The rhyme will persist because the rumour persists, and the rumour persists because it touches something that cannot be resolved by evidence or verdict or the passage of time, the knowledge that hunger makes people silent, and silence makes things possible that should not be possible, and the city can carry the dead inside it for years without knowing, or without admitting that it knows, or without being able to say with certainty where the knowing ends and the not knowing begins. The lamp flickers. The stove settles. The room is warm and quiet, and the bowl on the table has gone cold, and outside the window the city is dark, and the markets are empty, and the stalls are folded away, and the cobblestones hold nothing but the damp and the cold and the faint, ineradicable memory of all the hands that have passed things across them. Coins, cloth, shoes, bread, wrapped parcels of meat. In the long, hungry years when Hanover ate what it was given and did not ask, and will mask, and will spend a lifetime wondering whether it woulda, and dasted not, and for what that. The stove ticks once more. The flame in the lamp steadies. You sit in the quiet of your room and listen to the building and the city and the night gives you nothing back but its own silence, which is the same silence that has always been here, in the walls and the floors and the hallways of this place, holding everything it has ever held, releasing nothing, explaining nothing, and settling, as it always does, into the ordinary dark. You know the river, though you have never paid it much attention. It moves through the city the way rivers move through cities that have grown up around them without romanticizing them, quietly, darkly, performing its function without asking to be noticed. The Leine is not a grand river. It is not the Rhine or the Elbe or the Danube, rivers whose names carry the weight of history and commerce and the ambitions of empires. It is a working river, modest in width, slow in current, bordered on both sides by the backs of buildings that face away from the water as if slightly ashamed of it. In the Nordstadt and along the stretches south of the Altstadt, the river banks are lined with low walls of stone and brick, slick with moss and darkened by years of damp, and the paths that run alongside the water are narrow and uneven, used mainly by fishermen and by the workers from the small factories and laundries that draw water from the river and return it, somewhat changed. Downstream. Downstream. The water itself is the colour of weak tea in most lights, brown and opaque, carrying with it the sediment of the fields upstream and the runoff of the city itself, kitchen waste, coal ash, the slow leaching of everything a city produces and cannot be bothered to dispose of properly. You've walked along the Leine many times, probably, without thinking about what it carries. Everyone in Hanover has. The river is a shortcut, a boundary, a landmark. You cross it on bridges that you stop noticing after the first year of living here. You pass it on your way to the market or the station. You see it from the windows of certain buildings in certain parts of the city, and it registers as a feature of the landscape the way the sky registers or the cobblestones register, which is to say, not at all, unless something about it changes. And for a long time, nothing about it changes. The water moves. The banks hold. The fishermen stand along the low walls in the early morning, and in the evening, their lines dropping into the brown current, and they catch what they catch, small fish mostly, perch and roach and the occasional eel, and they do not look too carefully at what else the water is carrying, because the water is always carrying, things, sticks and rags and bottles and the swollen bodies of cats and dogs, and the general refuse of a city that has used this river as a drain for longer than anyone can remember. It is the spring of 1924. The winter has been hard, as the winters are always hard now, and the city is tired in the particular way that cities grow tired when the hardship has gone on long enough to become not a crisis but a condition. The snow has melted. The river is higher than usual, swollen with the runoff from the hills to the south, and the current has picked up, moving faster along the embankment walls, pulling at the debris that has accumulated along the banks during the frozen months. The water is colder than it looks. The light on the surface in the late afternoon has a flat metallic quality, and the shadows of the buildings fall across the river in long distorted shapes that stretch and tremble with the movement of the current. On the 17th of May, 2 children are playing along the riverbank near the Cellerstrasse, downstream from the centre of the city. They are doing what children do along rivers, throwing stones, poking at the mud with sticks, investigating the small washed-up world of debris that the current deposits in the shallows where the bank curves and the water slows. The light is good. The afternoon is warm enough that the children have taken off their coats. One of them is crouching near the waterline, reaching for something caught between 2 stones where the bank meets the water, something pale and round and smooth that does not look like a stone and does not look like a bottle, and does not look like a bottle and does not look like anything the child has seen before in the mud along the river. It is a skull. A human skull. Small, the bone cleaned by the water and the current until it is almost white, resting in the shallow muck between the stones as if it has been placed there deliberately. Though it has not. It has simply come to rest where the current left it, the way the current leaves everything, without intention and without ceremony. The child does not scream. Children in these years are not as easily frightened by the physical evidence of death as children in other times might be. They have seen things during the war and after the war that have made them familiar, if not comfortable, with the presence of the dead in the ordinary landscape of their lives. But the child knows that this is not ordinary. The child calls to the other child, and they look at the skull together, and then they go to find an adult, and the adult comes, and the adult stands at the waterline and looks at the skull, and the adult goes to find the police. The police come. They retrieve the skull. They note the location. They file a report. And then for a brief period, not much happens. Because a single skull found in a river in a city this size is not by itself an event that demands extraordinary action. People drown. People die along rivers. Bones surface from old burials, from hospital grounds, from the unmarked graves of the war years. A single skull is noted, catalogued, and set aside for examination, and the examination proceeds at the pace that examinations proceed in a department that is understaffed and overworked and dealing with the daily business of a city that produces more crime than its police force can manage. But the river is not finished. On the 29th of May, 12 days later, another skull is found. This one surfaces farther downstream, near the Delshiner Term, washed into the weeds along the bank where the current has deposited a long ridge of mud and debris. And then, within days, more bones begin to appear. Not skulls this time, but long bones, jaw fragments, the smaller bones of hands and feet, scattered along the riverbank as if the river has decided, after years of keeping it secret, to give it back piece by piece. The bones are found by fishermen, by workers, by children, by the men who maintain the paths along the embankment. They are found singly and in small clusters, washed into the shallows and caught in the roots of the bushes that grow along the bank and wedged between the stones of the embankment wall. Each discovery is reported. Each report is filed. And slowly, over the course of the following weeks, the reports begin to accumulate into something that can no longer be explained by accident or coincidence, or the ordinary mortality of a city beside a river. The police begin to take the matter seriously. They send officers to walk the banks. They organize searches. They bring in workers to clear the debris from the shallows and to probe the mud with long poles, looking for whatever else the river may be holding. And what the river is holding is considerable. Over the course of the summer of 1924, more than 500 bones and bone fragments will be recovered from the Leine and its banks, along with portions of soft tissue in varying states of decomposition, and the sheer volume of what comes out of the water makes it clear that this is not the result of a single death or even several deaths, but of something sustained, something repeated, something that has been happening for a long time and that has been using the river as its final repository. You are standing on the bank now, on a warm afternoon in June, watching the search. There are men in the shallows, knee-deep in the brown water, their trousers rolled up and their sleeves pushed back, moving slowly along the bank with their hands in the mud, feeling for the hard shapes beneath the surface. The water is warmer now than it was in May, and the smell of the river has changed. The cold mineral smell of spring runoff has been replaced by the richer, more organic smell of summer water, the smell of algae and warm mud, and the slow decomposition of everything the river carries. The men work in silence, mostly. They find things and they pass them back to the officers on the bank, who receive them with gloved hands and place them on sheets of canvas laid out on the path. The canvas is white. The bones are pale against it, cleaned by the water, stripped of everything that once covered them, and laid out in a growing line that has no order and no anatomy, because the bones have been separated from each other by the current, and by time and by whatever process scattered them into the water in the first place, and they cannot, at this point, be matched to individual bodies with any certainty. The news spreads. You cannot stop news like this from spreading in a city this size, where the tenements are close and the walls are thin, and the daily exchange of information at the pump and the market and the stairwell functions with a speed and efficiency that the newspapers cannot match. Within days, everyone in the Nordstadt knows that bones are coming out of the Leine. Within weeks, everyone in Hanover knows. And with the knowledge comes the question that the city has been avoiding for years, the question that has been sitting in the hallways and the kitchens and the market stalls, like the smell that no one could quite identify. Whose bones are these, and how did they get there, and who is responsible, and why, in a city with a police force and a welfare office and a system of reports and files and records, did no one notice what was happening, until the river itself decided to speak? The newspapers print the story. The headlines are blunt and ugly, as headlines tend to be when the facts are too large for nuance. Bones in the Leine. Skulls found along the bank. The police are investigating. The public is urged to remain calm. But the public does not remain calm, because the public has been carrying a suspicion that it did not know it was carrying, and the bones have given the suspicion a shape and a weight that it did not have before. The parents of missing boys, the mothers and fathers and grandmothers who wrote letters and filed reports and travelled to the city and were told that their sons had probably run off, begin to make themselves heard. They contact the police. They contact the newspapers. They say what they have been saying for years, only now they say it louder. And to an audience that is finally listening, my son came to Hanover and did not come home. My son was last seen at the station. My son was 15, 16, 17 years old. My son wrote a letter from Hanover and then stopped writing. My son has been missing for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and no one has told me anything. The police, who have been receiving these reports for years and filing them in the cabinets of the Welfare Office and the Missing Persons Registry, are now confronted with the possibility that the reports and the bones are connected, and that the connection runs through a part of their own operation that they would prefer not to examine too closely. Because Haarmann's name has come up before. It has come up in connection with missing boys. It came up as early as 1920, when the parents of a 17-year-old named Friedrich Haarmann reported their son missing and told the police that the boy had been seen in the company of a man named Haarmann, and the police investigated. Briefly, reluctantly, and searched Haarmann's room and found nothing conclusive, and let the matter drop. Friedrich Haarmann was never found. His name will appear on the indictment 4 years later, the first in a list that will grow to 24 confirmed victims and an unknown number beyond that. The search of the room in 1920 is the moment that the later investigations will return to again and again, because it is the moment when the machinery of silence could have been stopped and was not. The officers who entered Haarmann's room found evidence that a young person had been staying there recently, clothing, personal items, signs of a second occupant. But they did not find Friedrich Haarmann, and they did not find a body, and Haarmann explained the evidence in his usual way, with his usual fluency, and the officers accepted the explanation, or at least they did not challenge it with sufficient force, and they left, and they filed their report, and the report joined the other reports in the drawer. And the drawer closed, and 4 more years passed before it was opened again. You think about this. You think about the officers in the hallway of the Cellerstrasse building in 1929, standing in the same smells, hearing the same thin-walled sounds of the tenement at night, and making the decision, not a dramatic decision, not a decision that anyone would have recognized as a turning point at the time, but a small, tired, bureaucratic decision, that there was not enough evidence to pursue the matter further, that the boy had probably moved on, that Haarmann was a useful informant and that useful improplates, that the tabakquestate You do not judge them. You are in no position to judge. The machinery of silence is not built by villains. It is built by tired people making ordinary decisions under ordinary pressures, and the decisions accumulate, one by one, into a structure that is visible only from the outside, and only after the fact. The officers who searched Haarmann's room in 1920 did not know that they were building a structure. They did not know that their decision would be examined and re-examined for decades, that it would become the hinge on which the entire case turned in the public imagination, the moment when the city could have saved the boys who came after Friedrich Haarmann and did not. They knew only what they knew at the time, which was that they had a missing boy and a plausible explanation and a useful informant, and not enough evidence, and not enough time, and a stack of other cases on their desks that needed attention, and they made the decision that overworked, underpaid, undertrained police officers make every day in every city in the world, which is the decision to move on. And now, in the summer of 1924, moving on is no longer possible. The bones are on the canvas. The newspapers are printing names. The parents are demanding answers. The public is standing along the riverbank in small, quiet crowds, watching the police pull fragments of the dead out of the water. And the silence that protected Haarmann for years, the silence of the neighbours, the silence of the police, the silence of the markets, the silence of the city itself, is breaking apart, not with a sudden crack, but with the slow, grinding inevitability of ice giving way in a spring thaw. One fracture leading to another, the whole structure sagging and splitting and flying into the current that had been rond but it all salts. You stand on the bank and watch the water. The current moves past you, steady and unhurried, carrying its silt and its debris and whatever else it has been carrying for the past 4 years. The men in the shallows are still working. The canvas on the bank is fuller than it was an hour ago. The crowd behind you is larger and quieter, and there is a quality to the quiet that you recognize. It is the quiet of people who are watching something that they do not want to see but cannot look away from. The quiet of a city that is beginning to understand the cost of its own long refusal to ask the questions that the river has now answered for it. The light shifts. The afternoon deepens. The shadows of the buildings lengthen across the water, and the surface of the line darkens as the sun drops behind the roofline, and the men in the shallows begin to climb out, their legs muddy to the thigh, their hands empty now, their faces carrying the particular expression of men who have spent hours handling the dead and who will not speak about it easily afterward. The canvas is gathered and carried away. The crowd thins. The bank empties. And the river goes on, as it has always gone on, moving through the city without haste and without conscience, carrying what it carries, releasing what it releases, holding the rest in the slow dark of its bed, where the mud covers everything equally and the current smooths over every disturbance, and the water, by morning, will look exactly as it looked before anyone thought to search it, brown, opaque, quiet, and utterly unwilling to say what it knows. You are in the city when it happens, though you do not know it is happening until afterward, because the arrest, when it comes, does not come with the weight and ceremony that the scale of the crimes would seem to demand. It comes quietly, almost incidentally, on the 1924, on a morals charge, not yet. And it comes because the police, who've been circling Haarmann for weeks without quite closing in, have finally placed him under surveillance at the station and have watched him approach a boy, a young man named Karl From, and have intervened before anything could happen, and have taken Haarmann into custody on a charge of sexual impropriety, which is a charge they can make stick, a charge they can use to hold him heathen word the bird. You learn about it the way the neighborhood learns about everything, through the stairwell, through the courtyard, through the low murmur of voices at the pump and at the market, and at the doors of the tenement buildings where the women stand in the early morning and exchange the news that has arrived overnight, like weather. Haarmann has been taken. The police came for him. They took him from the station or from the street near the station, and they have him now, and they are not letting him go. The details are uncertain at first. Some say he was caught with a boy, some say he was caught with stolen goods, some say the police found something in his room, something terrible, something that explains the smell in the hallway and the buckets on the stairs, and the boys who came and did not leave, but the central fact is clear, and travels through the Nordstadt with the central fact is clear, and travels through the Nordstadt with the simple longer than anyone is willing to admit. He is in custody. The door on the Cellerstrasse is closed. The stove in his room is cold. The police search the room. You are not present for this, but you hear about it later, and what you hear is enough to understand why the officers who conducted the search did not speak freely about what they found. The room is the same room you have imagined many times, the iron bed, the table, the chair, the wardrobe with the wire loop, the washstand, the stove. But the room, examined with the attention that the police are now bringing to it, is not the same room that the neighbours have been walking past for years. The walls, when tested, show traces of blood. The floorboards, despite the scrubbing, despite the regularity with which Haarmann cleaned and maintained his quarters, hold stains that have soaked into the grain of the wood and cannot be entirely removed. There are items of clothing in the room and in bundles stored beneath the bed and in the wardrobe that do not belong to Haarmann and do not belong to Granz, and that correspond in some cases to descriptions provided by the families of missing boys. A particular shirt, a particular pair of trousers, a particular cap with a mark on the brim, that a mother will later identify as her son's. The room is small, and the evidence is close, and the officers who collect it work in a silence that has nothing to do with professionalism, and everything to do with the growing comprehension of what this room has been for the past 4 years, what the stove has heated, what the basin has held, what the thin walls have carried night after night while the building slept around it. Granz is arrested separately. He is picked up within days of Haarmann's detention, found in the city, brought in, questioned. He denies everything. He denies knowledge of the killings, denies participation, denies that the clothing he sold at the markets came from anyone other than the ordinary sources of the second-hand trade. His composure during the early interrogations is noted by the officers who question him, a coolness that reads, depending on who is observing it, as either innocence or practiced self-preservation. He will maintain this posture through the months of investigation and into the trial itself, adjusting his story as needed, conceding small points when the evidence forces him to, while holding firmly to the central claim that he did not know, that he was not involved, that whatever Haarmann did in the room at night was done without his consent. Haarmann is different. Haarmann, from the first hours of his detention, is something the police have not encountered before and are not prepared to manage. He talks. He talks freely, expansively, with a volubility that is difficult to reconcile with the nature of what he is describing. He does not behave like a man who has been caught. He behaves like a man who has been waiting to be asked, who has been holding a secret for so long that the release of it produces something closer to relief than to remorse, and the interrogators, experienced officers, men who have sat across the table from murderers and thieves and confidence men for years, find themselves unsettled not by his reticence, but by his willings, by the tone of his voice when he describes what he has done, which is calm and conversational and occasionally marked by a strange appropriate, separate writing for a moment, he confesses to the killings. Not all at once, not in a single coherent statement, but in a series of interrogation sessions that stretch over days and weeks, and that produce a body of testimony that is vast, contradictory, disturbing, and maddeningly incomplete. He gives names, some of them. He gives dates, some of them. He describes how he brought the boys home from the station, how he fed them, how he let them sleep in his bed, and how, during the night, he killed them. The method he describes is consistent across most of his accounts. He attacked them during or after a sexual assault, biting into the throat, applying pressure until the victim lost consciousness and died. The description is clinical in some tellings and vague in others, and the interrogators cannot always determine whether the vagueness is a product of failing memory, of deliberate evasion, or of a mind that did not retain the details of individual killings because there were too many of them, and they blurred together into a single repeated act. You think about the interrogation room. You have not been inside it, but you can imagine it well enough. A plain room in the police building, a table, 2 chairs, a window that may or may not be open, the particular airless quality of an institutional space in summer. Haarmann sits in one chair. The officers sit across from him, or beside him, or stand near the door, and they ask their questions, and he answers, and the answers come with a readiness that is itself a kind of horror, because the readiness suggests that the acts he is describing occupy no special category in his mind, that they are stored alongside everything else, the market stalls, the police work, the daily routines of the Cellerstrasse, as events that happened and he can recall and relate, without the emotional disruption that the officers expect and do not find. He claims at various points in the interrogations to have killed between 30 and 40 people. The number shifts. It moves upward in some sessions and downward in others, and the investigators learn quickly that the number is not something Haarmann has calculated, but something he is estimating, guessing at, adjusting according to his mood or his sense of what the interrogators want to hear, or the particular quality of attention he is receiving on a given day. He wants attention. This becomes clear as the interrogations proceed. He wants to be the center of the room, the man who holds the story, the man whose words are written down and whose memory is consulted and whose cooperation is sought. When the officers are attentive, he is expansive. When they press too hard, or when they challenge his account, or when they suggest that his version of events is self-serving or incomplete, he becomes irritable, sullen, and on occasion he retracts what he has said and replaces it with something different, something that contradicts the earlier statement without acknowledging the contradiction. The officers learn to work around this. They learn to let him talk, to follow his digressions, to wait for the moments of clarity that surface unpredictably in the middle of long, wandering monologues about his childhood, his father, his time in the military, his relationship with Grands, the condition of the second-hand markets, the quality of the coal available in the Nordstadt, and the many ways in which the city has failed to treat him with the respect he believes he deserves. The useful information comes in fragments, a name dropped casually into a story about something else, a location mentioned in passing, a detail about a particular boy's clothing or belongings that can be checked against the missing persons reports and that, when it matches, sends a small cold confirmation through the room that what this man is saying, beneath the performance and the inconsistency and the inappropriate ease, is true. He talks about the disposal. He talks about it with the same unsettling matter-of-factness that characterizes everything else he says, describing how he dismembered the bodies in his room. On the floor, near the stove, using tools that the police have since recovered or identified, and how he wrapped the remains and carried them out of the building in bundles and in the bucket that the neighbours had seen him carrying down the stairs so many times without curiosity. He described taking the bundles to the river, to the Leine, usually at night, usually alone, and dropping them into the water from the embankment or from one of the bridges that cross the river in the parts of the city where the banks are unlit and the foot traffic is sparse after dark. He describes this work, and he uses the word work, or words like it, without apparent irony, as heavy, unpleasant, and physically demanding, and he describes the clean-up afterward, the scrubbing of the floor, the rinsing of the basin, the washing of his clothing, with the tired practicality of a man describing a chore that must be done regularly, and that he has learned to do efficiently. The interrogators ask about the meat. They ask because the rumours have reached them, as the rumours have reached everyone, and because the question is one that the public is demanding an answer to, and that the investigation cannot ignore. Haarmann's responses on this point are the most unstable of all his statements. At times he acknowledges selling or giving away meat. At times he denies it. At times he says things that seem calculated to produce shock rather than truth. Statements so extreme that the officers recording them note their skepticism in the margins of the transcript. The investigators are unable to extract a consistent account, and they are unable to determine, from the physical evidence available to them, whether the meat allegations are substantially true, partially true, or a grotesque embellishment that Haarmann has adopted because it amplifies the horror of what he has done, and thereby amplifies the attention he receives for having done it. The question will remain open. It will remain open at trial, and it will remain open afterward, and the investigators who worked the case will carry the uncertainty with them for the rest of their careers, which is its own particular kind of burden. You think about the families. You think about them because, during these weeks of interrogation, as Haarmann's confessions accumulate and the names of victims begin to be matched against the missing persons files, the families are being contacted. Letters are sent. Telegrams. In some cases, officers travel to the towns and villages where the missing boys came from and deliver the news in person, standing in the doorways of farmhouses and tenement apartments and saying the words that the parents have been dreading and half expecting for years. Your son has been identified. Your son is not coming home. Your son was among the victims of a man named Friedrich Haarmann, and we are very sorry, and there will be a trial, and you will be asked to come to Hanover and identify clothing, and you will be asked to sit in a courtroom and listen to things that no parent should ever have to hear. Some of the families have been waiting for 3 years, some for 4. Some have written dozens of letters to the police, to the welfare office, to the newspapers, and have received nothing in return but the polite, exhausted silence of a system that did not have the resources or the will to look for their children. And now the system is looking. Now the system is finding. And what it is finding is not a boy who ran away and started a new life in another city, which is what the parents told themselves in the darkest hours of the night, when hope was the only alternative to something worse. What the system is finding is a name on a list, a set of bones on a canvas, a coat in a police evidence room that a mother will touch with both hands and hold against her face and identify by the mend on the left elbow that she made herself on an evening in her own kitchen before her son left home for the last time. You are in the city during these weeks and you can feel the change. It is not a dramatic change. It is not a riot or a demonstration or a public outcry of the kind that the newspapers will later describe. It is something quieter and more pervasive, a shift in the air, a heaviness that settles over the Nordstadt and over the streets around the station and over the markets and the tenement buildings and the river walks where people used to stroll in the evenings without thinking about what the water was carrying. People do not talk about Haarmann the way they talk about ordinary criminals. They talk about him the way people talk about a sickness that has been in the house for a long time without being diagnosed, with a mixture of horror, relief, shame, and the uneasy recognition that the sickness was visible all along, that the symptoms were there, that the smell in the hallway and the boys on the stairs and the meat at the market were all signs of something that anyone could have read if they had been willing to read them. The police feel this too. The officers who worked with Haarmann, who paid him for information, who relied on his presence at the station as a useful pair of eyes in a difficult crowd, are now in the position of explaining how a man on their payroll killed 24 people under their protection. The explanations are inadequate. They will always be inadequate. The formal reviews will note failures of oversight, failures of communication, failures to follow up on reports that, in retrospect, pointed clearly toward the truth. but the formal language of institutional review does not capture the thing that the officers themselves feel, which is the sickening weight of proximity, the knowledge that they shook this man's hand, that they sat with him in offices and in beer halls, that they trusted him, that they sent him back to the station where the boys were waiting, and that every boy who followed Haarmann home after 1920, after the search of the room that found nothing and concluded nothing, followed him under the implicit protection of the Hanover criminal police. The stove in Haarmann's room is cold now. The room has been sealed. The door is locked, and the lock is new, fitted by the police, and the hallway outside the door smells of nothing worse than the ordinary smells of the building. Damp plaster, old cooking, coal dust, lie. The neighbours pass the door on their way up and down the stairs, and they do not pause, and they do not look at it longer than they have to, because the door is just a door now, a closed rectangle of wood in a tenement hallway, and whatever it held is no longer behind it. It is in the police building, in the interrogation room, in the stacks of paper that are growing taller on the investigators' desks, in the confessions that keep coming, day after day, in the calm and terrible voice of a man who sits in his chair and talks about the dead the way other men talk about the weather, easily, naturally, without the weight that living carry when they speak of those who are gone. The evening settles over the city. The river moves in its bed. The station is still busy, still full of travellers and drifters and the restless, unanchored population of the post-war years, but there is a difference now, a subtle difference, that you feel more than you see. The boys on the platform are being watched. Not by Haarmann. Haarmann is gone, sitting in a cell, talking to anyone who will listen, but by the city itself, which has finally turned its attention to the place where the disappearances began, and is seeing, for the first time, what was always there: the benches, the waiting rooms, the thin, tired faces of boys who do not know where they will sleep tonight. The city sees them now, and the seeing is too late, and the city knows it is too late, and this knowledge settles into the stone and the brick and the iron of the station like damp settling into old walls, and it will not dry out, and it will not be painted over, and it will remain there, in the fabric of the place, long after the trial is finished, and the sentence has been carried out, and the name Haarmann has become a thing that Hanover carries the way the silt, silently, and without any prospect of down. You are inside the building before you are ready for it. The courtroom is on an upper floor, reached by a staircase that is wide enough for 3 men to walk abreast, but that feels, on this morning, as narrow as the hallway of a tenement, because the people pressing up the stairs are shoulder to shoulder, breath against breath, overcoats brushing overcoats, and the sound of their feet on the stone steps rises and merges into a single continuous murmur that fills the stairwell the water fills a pipe, dense, directional, and impossible to stop. It is the 4th of December 1924. The city has been waiting for this morning for months, and now that it has arrived, the city has come to see it in person, crowding the corridors of the Schwurgericht, the criminal court of Hanover, in numbers that the building was never designed to hold. You find a place. You are fortunate, because the courtroom is not large, and the seats that are available to the public are few, and the demand for those seats has been so overwhelming that the court has been forced to issue tickets, printed cards, distributed in advance, controlling who may enter and who must wait outside in the corridor or in the street below, where the crowd is gathered despite the cold and despite the fact that they will hear nothing and see nothing except the closed doors of the building and the occasional figure entering the side entrance that the court officials have designated for witnesses. The people in the street stand and wait because the waiting itself is a kind of participation, a way of being present at the thing that the city has been building toward since the bones came out of the river, and the cold does not discourage them, and the hours do not discourage them, and they will return tomorrow and the day after, and for every day of the proceedings, standing in the same place, wearing the same coats, breathing the same winter air, as if their presence at the threshold is itself a form of testimony. Inside, the courtroom smells of wool and floor wax, and the faint staleness of a room that has been closed overnight, and opened into a morning that is too cold for the windows to be raised. The benches are hard. The light comes from high windows that let in the flat December grey, and from electric fixtures that cast a yellowish glow over the proceedings without warming them. The judges sit at the front, the presiding judge and the lay assessors who will hear the evidence and render the verdict, and beside them, at a separate table, the prosecutors have arranged their papers and their files in stacks that are thick enough to suggest the weight of what has been gathered over the past 6 months. The The defense attorneys sit opposite, and their stacks are thinner, and their faces carry the particular expression of men who know that the facts of the case are not in their favor, and that their task is not to dispute what happened, but to shape the way the court understands why it happened and what consequences should follow from that understanding. And then Haarmann is brought in. You see him before you hear him, because the room goes quiet when the door at the side of the courtroom opens and the guards lead him to the dock, and in that quiet you can hear the creak of the bench beneath the woman next to you as she shifts forward, and the intake of breath from somewhere behind you, and the small involuntary sounds that people make when they are seeing a thing they have imagined many times and finding that the reality does not match the imaginating. Haarmann is smaller than you expected. He is dressed neatly, a dark suit, a white shirt, his hair combed, and he moves with an ease that seems wrong for the setting, a lightness in his step that does not belong to a man walking into his own trial on 27 counts of murder. He looks around the courtroom. He looks at the judges and the prosecutors and the public gallery, and there is something in his face that you recognize from the descriptions you have heard. The friendliness, the animation, the quality of a man who is accustomed to being the center of attention, and who is not displeased to find himself at the center of attention once more, even under these circumstances, even in this room, even with the weight of what has been done pressing down on every surface and every face like the winter air pressing down on every surface and every face like the winter air pressing down on the roof of the Beld. He sits. The proceedings begin. And what follows over the next days is something that the city of Hanover has never experienced and will never experience again. A trial that is not merely a legal proceeding, but a public reckoning. A slow and methodical opening of the room on the Cellerstrasse and the streets around the station and the markets and the river, and the hallways of the tenement buildings and the offices of the police, and the filing cabinets of the welfare system. An opening that exposes not just the crimes of one man, but the conditions that made those crimes possible, and the failures that allowed the categorical. The charges are read. 27 counts of murder. The victims are named, and the naming takes time, because each name is a person, and each person had a life, and each life had a family, that is, in many cases, present in the courtroom, sitting in the rows reserved for the bereaved, listening to their sons' names spoken in the formal language of the law, and hearing, in that language, the confirmation of what they have known and feared and refused to accept for years. The names come one after another. Friedel Roth, Fritz Franke, Wilhelm Schulze, Roland Hirsch, Hans Kimes, Fritz Wittig, and with each name the courtroom absorbs another weight, another silence, another mother or father or grandmother sitting very still on a hard bench and holding in their lap the particular grief of a person who has been waiting for an answer and has received one, and wishes they had not. Haarmann responds to the charges with a freedom that unsettles the court. He does not sit quietly. He does not maintain the posture of a defendant receiving the accusations of the state. He interrupts. He comments. He disputes details, not the fact of the killings which he has already confessed to, but the specific names, the specific dates, the attribution of particular victims to his account. He denies some of the charges. He accepts others. He challenges the prosecutors on points of evidence with a familiarity that suggests he has spent his months in custody studying the case against him with the attention of a man who regards the proceedings as a negotiation rather than a judgment. He says at one point that he cannot remember all of them. He says this without visible distress, as a practical matter, the way a man might say that he cannot remember all the meals he has eaten, or all the streets he has walked down in a given year. The room absorbs this. The room absorbs it because there is nothing else to do with it. Because the statement is so far outside the range of human expression that the normal responses, anger, disgust, pity, seem inadequate, and what replaces them is a kind of stunned blankness, a failure of feeling that is itself a feeling, and that settles over the courtroom like the winter light through the high windows. The witnesses come. They come in a procession that lasts for days, and the procession is the hardest part of the trial, harder than the confessions, harder than the forensic evidence, harder than the forensic evidence, harder than the photographs of the bones on the canvas by the river, because the witnesses are alive, and their aliveness is the thing that makes the dead real. The parents come first. The mothers mostly, though some fathers are present as well, and the grandmothers of boys whose parents were already dead or absent or unable to make the journey. They sit in the witness chair. A plain wooden chair set to the side of the courtroom where the judges and the defendant and the public can see them. And they describe their sons. They describe what the boy looked like. They describe what the boy was wearing when he left home. They describe the last conversation, the last letter, the last time they saw the boy's face. And their descriptions have the terrible precision of memories that have been revisited so many times that every detail has been burnished to a hard, permanent clarity. The colour of the coat, the patch on the knee, the way the boy's hair fell across his forehead, the boots that were too large and had to be stuffed with newspaper at the toes. They identify clothing. This is the part that the courtroom finds most difficult to bear. The police bring the garments into the room. Coats, trousers, shirts, caps, shoes, and they are laid out on a table, and the parents are asked to look at them, to examine them, to say whether these are the clothes their son was wearing when he left home. And the mothers come forward, and they touch the fabric, and they turn the garments over in their hands with a practiced, intimate knowledge of women who have mended and washed and folded these things many times. And some of them identify the clothing immediately. This is his. I know this coat. I sewed this button. And some of them cannot be certain. And some of them break down entirely, holding the cloth against their chest and crying in the particular way that grief cries when it has been held in for years and is finally given permission, and courtroom sits and says nothing, because there is not. Haarmann watches too. He watches the parents with an expression that shifts between attentiveness and irritation, as if their grief is an interruption to the proceedings rather than the reason for them. When a mother identifies a coat, he leans forward. When a mother cries, he looks away, not in shame. There is no visible shame in him, not at any point during the trial, but in something closer to impatience. The impatience of a man who wants the trial to move forward, who wants the attention to return to him, who finds the testimony of the bereaved less interesting than his own testimony, less compelling than the story he has been telling about himself for months in the interrogation room, and that he intends to continue telling here, in this courtroom, before these judges, for as long as any will lemmo. The forensic evidence is presented. The medical examiners describe the bones recovered from the Leine, the number, the condition, the estimated ages of the victims, the marks on the bone that indicate cutting, the difficulty of matching individual bones to individual identities when the remains have been scattered and mixed by the current over a period of years. The testimony is clinical, delivered in the measured language of men who are accustomed to speaking about the dead in professional terms, and the clinical language provides a kind of shelter for the courtroom, a way of hearing what is being said without having to feel the full force of it. But the shelter is thin, and it breaks at moments when a specific skull is described, when the estimated age of a victim matches the age of a boy whose mother has already testified, when the dimensions of a particular wound align with the method that Haarmann has described in his confessions. And at these moments the courtroom goes very still, and the silence is not the silence of boredom or inattention, but the silence of boredom or inattention, but the silence of people who are holding something inside themselves that has no name out, and no weak. But to the tatar the connector that a bright as Gran sits apart from Haarmann. He is composed. He is young, 23 years old, and his youth, in the context of the courtroom, reads as a kind of argument in itself, as if his age alone should be enough to separate him from the older man's crimes. His defense is denial, consistently maintained, carefully calibrated to concede what cannot be denied, that he lived with Haarmann, that he benefited from the sale of clothing, that he was present in the room on many of the nights when the killings may have occurred, while insisting that he did not know, did not participate, did not incite. The prosecution argues otherwise. The prosecution argues that Gren selected victims, that he pointed out boys whose clothing he wanted, that his desires drove Haarmann to kill more frequently and less discriminately than he might have done alone. The argument is plausible. The evidence for it is suggestive but not conclusive, and the court will struggle with this, with the gap between what it believes and what it can prove, with the legal difficulty of assigning guilt to a man whose hands are clean, but whose presence in the room is itself a kind of contamination. The psychiatric testimony occupies considerable time. The court has appointed experts to examine Haarmann and to determine whether he was, at the time of the killings, legally responsible for his actions, whether he understood the nature and wrongfulness of what he was doing, whether he was capable of controlling his behavior, whether his mental state diminishes or extinguishes the criminal liability that the law would otherwise assign, The experts disagree with each other on some points, but converge on the essential finding. Haarmann is not insane. He is disordered, certainly. He is abnormal. He possesses a personality that the psychiatric language of the period describes in terms that are imprecise by later standards, but that convey, accurately enough, the impression of a man whose inner landscape is profoundly different from the landscape of ordinary human feeling. But he knows what he did. He knew what he was doing when he did it. He was capable of planning, of concealment, of sustained deception over a period of years, and these capacities, in the judgment of the experts, place him within the reach of the law. Haarmann rejects the psychiatric testimony with contempt. He does not wish to be called insane. He does not wish to be understood as defective or diminished. He wishes to be seen as a man who did what he did for his own reasons. And this wish, the wish to own his crimes, to hold them as achievements rather than symptoms, is itself a piece of evidence, though it is evidence of what exactly the court is not entirely sure. The trial moves toward its end. The closing arguments are delivered. The prosecution speaks for the dead, for the 27 boys named in the indictment, for the families who have waited and the families who have never known, for the city that was deceived and the system that failed. The defense speaks for mitigation, for the recognition that Haarmann's mind was not a normal mind, for the acknowledgement that the conditions of the time and the failures of the police contributed to the scale of the crimes, for mercy, perhaps, though the word is difficult to use in a room where the mothers are still sitting in their rows and the clothing is still laid out on the table. The presiding judge instructs the court. The assessors withdraw to deliberate. The verdict comes on the 19th of December. Haarmann is found guilty of 24 of the 27 murders charged. 3 of the charges are dropped for insufficient evidence. The remains could not be matched, the identifications could not be confirmed, the chain of evidence did not hold tightly enough for the court to convict. 24 convictions. 24 boys whose deaths have been established, in the formal language of the law, as crimes committed by this man, in this city, over a period of years, while the stove ticked and the walls carried the sounds and the neighbours walked past the door, and the police paid their informant, and the trains kept arriving, and the primes kept buying, and the river kept flowing, and the city kept its silence. Haarmann is sentenced to death. The sentence is delivered in the flat, procedural tone that the law uses for its most extreme judgments, as if the gravity of the words might be diminished by any emphasis, and Haarmann receives the sentence with a calm that is more disturbing than any outburst could have been. He does not protest. He does not weep. He says, by some accounts, that he is satisfied, that the sentence is just, that he would prefer death to imprisonment, and the statement has the quality of everything else he has said during the trial. Too easy, too smooth, too free of the weight that the words should carry. Granz is convicted as well, though the court's judgment on him is more complicated and more contested. He is found guilty of aiding and abetting in the murder of one victim and of being an accessory after the fact in other cases, and he is sentenced to death as well, though this sentence will later be commuted to 12 years of imprisonment on appeal, a reduction that satisfies no one, that confirms nothing, and that leaves the question of Granz's true role in the same uncertain set and space where it has always been, somewhere between knowledge and participation, between profiting and causing, between the closed door and whatever happened behind it. The courtroom empties. The bench is clear. The clothing on the table is gathered and taken away to the evidence room, where it will remain for a time and then be disposed of, because the law has no further use for a boy's coat once the verdict has been delivered and the sentence has been pronounced. Are no words that the trial has not siled in, is not briled, it's selled. It's not his stables and siled into mail to me, but our coits tatstums and dibble van a cape was sailed. You are awake before the city is. It is the 15th of April 1925, and the morning has not yet arrived in any way that you would recognize as morning. There is no light at the window, no sound of carts on the cobblestones, no clatter of the first trams beginning their routes along the Gortstrasse. The hour is early enough that the tenement buildings of the Nordstadt are still holding their nighttime silence, the stoves unlit, the basins untouched, the hallways carrying nothing but the cold draught that moves between the stairwell and the gap beneath the front door. You are awake because the city is awake, or because the part of the city that matters this morning is awake, the part that is contained within the walls of the prison on the Schützenplatz, where the lights have been burning since well before dawn, and where the preparations that began in the final days of March have now reached their conclusion. Haarmann has been in his cell for months. The time between the sentencing in December and the execution in April has passed in the way that institutional time passes, slowly, evenly, without the texture that the outside world provides. He has received visitors. He has spoken to clergymen. He has made statements, some of them recorded and some of them not, about his crimes, about his life, about the city, about the police, about grands, about the boys whose names he could remember, and the boys whose names he could not. He has been, by the accounts of those who attended him during these months, remarkably unchanged, the same volubility, the same animation, the same unsettling absence of the weight that his situation would seem to demand. He has not appealed his sentence. He has, in fact, expressed his preference for death over any alternative, stating that he does not wish to grow old in a prison cell, and that the sentence of the court is acceptable to him, and this acceptance has been delivered in the same conversational tone that has characterized every statement he has made since his arrest, as if the matter of his own execution is a practical question that he has considered and resolved and is now ready to move past. The method is the guillotine. Germany in 1925 still employs this instrument for judicial executions, though the practice is not uniform across the states and the public appetite for it has been declining for years. The machine has been prepared. The executioner, a professional, a man whose occupation is listed in the records with the same neutral precision as any other trade, has travelled to Hanover for the purpose and has inspected the apparatus and has confirmed that it is in working order. The courtyard where the execution will take place is an enclosed space within the prison grounds, walled on all sides, paved, open to the sky, but not visible from the surrounding streets. A small number of officials will be present: the prison director, the attending physician, representatives of the court, the executioner and his assistants, and a clergyman who has been with Haarmann during the night, and who will remain with him until the end. The public is not admitted. The crowd that has gathered in the streets near the prison, drawn by the knowledge that this is the morning, and that the thing that the city has been waiting for since the trial is about to happen, will see nothing and hear nothing. They will know only what they are told afterward, which will be very little because the state does not describe the mechanics of its killing in detail, and because the details, in this case, are not considered suitable for public consumption. You are not in the courtyard. You cannot be. But you are in the city, and the city is holding its breath in a way that you can feel even in your own room, even with the door closed and the window shut and the stove cold and the morning still dark. There is a quality to the silence of a city that knows something is happening. Not the silence of sleep, which is passive and indifferent, but the silence of attention, of collective awareness focused on a single point that cannot be seen from where you are standing, but that pulls at the edges of your consciousness the way a stone at the bottom of a river pulls at the current without disturbing the surface. Haarmann is brought from his cell in the early hours. The accounts of his final morning are sparse and not entirely consistent, as accounts of executions tend to be, because the people who are present are under strain, and because the state's interest in recording the event extends only to the fact of its completion, not to the human texture of the minutes that precede it. He has been given a last meal. He has spoken to the clergyman. He has, by some accounts, been calm, not peaceful exactly, but steady, composed, carrying himself with the same odd self-possession that he displayed throughout the trial, as if the protocol of the morning is something he has prepared for, and is now performing with the competence of a man who takes pride in doing things properly. He walks to the courtyard under escort. The sky above the courtyard is not yet light. The walls are high enough that the sound of the city beyond them, if there is any sound, if the trams have started, if the first carts are moving on the cobblestones, does not reach the paved space where the apparatus stands. The execution is carried out. The records note the time and the fact. The attending physician confirms death. The body is removed. The courtyard is cleaned. And the morning, which has been suspended in the long airless interval between the cell and the blade, resumes its ordinary progress. The light comes, the sounds come, the city stirs and wakes and begins the business of another day. And the thing that was Friedrich Haarmann is no longer in the world, and the world closes over the space where he was with the same slow, undramatic finality with which it closes over everything that is removed from it. You hear about it later. Everyone hears about it later. The news moves through the Nordstadt the way all news moves through the Nordstadt, through the stairwell, through the courtyard, through the pump, and the market and the low murmur of voices at the doors of the tenement buildings where the women stand in the morning cold and exchange the daily intelligence of the city's life. He is dead. They did it this morning. It is over. and the words are passed from mouth to mouth with a heaviness that is not grief and not satisfaction and not relief, but something compounded of all three, a feeling that has no single name because it belongs to a situation that has no precedent in the experience of the people who are feeling it. The city does not recover quickly. You would not expect it to, and it does not. The trial is over, the sentence has been carried out, the man is dead, and the formal machinery of justice has completed its work. But the informal machinery, the machinery of memory, of rumour, of unsolved feeling, of questions that the verdict did not answer and that no verdict did not answer, continues to run, and it runs for years, and it runs in ways that the people of Hanover did not anticipate and cannot control. The bones remain. Not all of them were identified. Not all of them could be matched to the names on the indictment or to the names in the missing persons files. Some of them were buried in the Stockener cemetery in a common grave unmarked, because the families could not be found or because the families did not wish to claim remains that could not be identified with certainty as belonging to their son. The grave is plain. It is a piece of ground in a cemetery that holds many other pieces of ground, and there is nothing about it that would tell a visitor what it contains or why it matters, and the grass grows over it the same way the grass grows over every other grave, and the seasons pass, and the ground settles, and the dead lie where the city put them, unnamed and uncounted and unclaimed, in the quiet that is the only thing the dead possess. The river goes on. The Leine does not remember. It moves through the city the way it has always moved, carrying its silt and its debris, and the slow, brown, opaque weight of its own current, and the banks where the bones were found look the same as they did before anyone searched them, mossy, damp, unremarkable, bordered by the same warehouses and the same factory walls, and the same factory walls and the fishermen stand in the early morning and cast their lines into water that has been washed clean by 4 seasons of rain and snow melt, and the ordinary, relentless passage of time. Children play along the bank. Couples walk the embankment path on summer evenings. The water moves beneath the bridges and catches the light and loses the light and moves on, and no one standing on the bank today would know unless they had been told that this is the river that gave back the dead, that this is the water that carried the bones, that this is the place where the city's longest silence was finally broken by the current itself, which held what it was given, for as long as it could, and then released it, piece by piece, into the hands of the living. Haarmann's name persists. It persists in ways that the city did not want and could not prevent. The children's rhyme, the one about waiting by the Leine, about the man who comes with the hatchet and makes you into mincemeat, appears in the schoolyards and on the streets within months of the trial, and it is sung with the cheerful, uncomprehending cruelty of children who have learned the words without understanding what they mean, and the parents who hear it do not always stop it, because the rhyme has become a thing that belongs to the city now, a piece of local knowledge that is passed from child to child. The child the way jump parade junk counting games are passed, and the stopping of it would be trialed. The rhyme will persist for decades. It will outlast the people who witnessed the trial, and the people who knew the victims, and the people who bought clothing at the second-hand markets. Without asking where it came from, it will become a piece of folklore, detached from its origins, carrying the horror of the case in a form that is so compressed and so rhythmic that it no longer sounds like horror at all, but like a game, a song, a thing that children say to each other in the dark for the pleasure of being frightened, without knowing that the fear they are playing with was once real, and that the man in the song was real, and that the man in the song was real, and that the man in the song was real, and that the waiting and the chopping and the meat were not inventions, but sit league that. You think about the mothers. You think about them because the trial is over and the execution is done, and the newspapers have moved on to other stories, and the city is rebuilding itself in the way that cities rebuild, not by remembering, but by covering over, by paving, by painting, by filling the empty spaces with new tenants and new businesses and new routines that do not carry the weight of the old ones. The mothers go home. That's Bart says, the building on the Cellerstrasse stands. The room is rented to someone else eventually, because rooms in the Nordstadt are scarce, and the need for shelter does not observe the proprieties of history. A new tenant moves in. A new bed is pushed against the wall. A new stove fire is lit. The walls are papered over perhaps, and the floorboards are scrubbed to Guinand. and the washrobe doors are fixed or replaced, and the room becomes, in the slow, absorptive way of tenement rooms, a different room, a room that belongs to the present and not to the past, a room whose walls carry the smells of a different household, and whose floorboards creak under different feet, and whose window looks out on the same courtyard, but sees it differently, because the person standing at the window, standing in the same history, and does not stand, it's hexennavic. You are in your own room now. It is late. The city has been quiet for hours. The stove has burned down to its last heat, and the iron is cooling, and the tick that you have come to know so well, the slow, regular, almost musical contraction of the metal as it gives up its warmth to the air, is growing softer, and the intervals between the ticks are growing longer, and soon the stove will be silent, and the room will be cold, and the only sound will be the sound of the building itself, the creak and settle of old wood and old plaster, adjusting to the temperature, the faint whistle of the draught in the bird, that stiet the verklighet bid behideth, the fairer and these keeper ut fake-ward of the fredetim nigarakot. The lamp beside you is burning low. The flame is drawn down into the wick until it is barely visible, a small blue tremor at the base of the glass, casting no useful light but not yet gone, holding on to the last of the oil with the persistence of a thing that does not know it is finished. You watch it. You watch the flame diminish until it is less a flame than a memory of a flame, a faint warmth in the glass, a glow that you can feel against your hand if you hold it close enough, but that you could not read by or find your way by or use for any purpose except the knowledge that it is still there, that it has not yet gone out, that the dark has not yet fully arrived. The stove ticks once more. The flame steadies for a moment, then lowers. The building settles. The roof rising is the dreiptagend. Det enda Hans Tidlywong with the queries at besafting. It has survived what it has survived and has gone on living, as cities do, not by resolving, but by continuing, not by understanding, but by enduring, not by forgetting, but by vergwaiting, but by holowing, the vergekend at a own pace, and its own pace, and at all present as strafend, the bravest that the would stayed at the dienes, that it has to dis it add.